Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am Lieutenant Commander Zachary Zumwalt, stationed here in Singapore at Commlog Westpac CTF 73. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Military Chaplains and Strategic Religious Engagements. This event is sponsored by the Navy Chaplain Corps' Religion and Culture Community of Interest, the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy, and the Everett Center for Global Religious Freedom at Dallas Baptist Seminary. Thank you so much to our sponsors, to everyone in the audience for tuning in, and to all the participants who will be sharing their expertise with us over the next 3 hours. It's a great honor to gather with you all for this important and timely conversation. Military chaplains provide crucial religious advisement to our commanders, helping them navigate the complex religious dynamics within the U.S. Indo-PACOM area of responsibility. As religious actors ourselves, chaplains are uniquely positioned to engage with civilian Indo-Pacific faith leaders to help build trusting relationships, ameliorate suffering, and promote regional just peace. Today's webinar is intended to enhance the chaplain's strategic religious engagement capacity through our keynote presentation, our 3 panel discussions, and our 3 Q&A sessions. We will have the opportunity to learn about the current state of religious leader engagement here in the Indo-Pacific, and then explore U.S. government interagency opportunities to enhance this religious advisement. A couple of programming notes before I introduce our keynote speaker. First, this webinar is being recorded so that chaplains who can't be with us here live can watch it later. Details on where this recording will be archived and how chaplains can access it will be shared via email after this webinar. Second, a reminder to our military personnel to keep this discussion at the unclass level, as we do have civilian presenters and audience members. Third, there will be a brief Q&A session following each of the 3 panel discussions. If an audience member has a question for the panelists, type that into the chat box during the panels. And I ask when you do type in your question, please include your name and your command or your organization affiliation that you're a part of. Apologies in advance if we don't have time to get to all of your questions for each panel. And then finally, to those providing remarks during this webinar, thank you again. Also, as you're aware, we have an extremely full 3 hours planned. And so I ask you to please be respectful and mindful of the speakers after you and remain within your allotted time. Okay, with all of that out of the way.
So we do to a certain degree, but
do we have a hot mic?
It's sparingly.
With all that out of the way, let's get to today's training. So our keynote speaker is Dr. Douglas Johnston, who is the Vice Chairman and founder of the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy. He is a distinguished graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, a retired Navy captain who served in senior military and civilian positions, including Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy and Manpower, Director of Policy Planning and Management in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He holds a PhD in political science from Harvard University, where he also taught international affairs for 6 years, while serving as the founding director of Harvard's executive program in national and international security. Dr. Johnston's most recent assignment was as Executive Vice President and COO of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. His publications include Religion, the Missing Dimension of Statecraft, published in 1994, Foreign Policy in the 21st Century, the U.S. Leadership Challenge, published in 1996, Faith-Based Diplomacy, Trumping Realpolitik, published in 2003, and Religion, Terror, and Error, U.S. Foreign Policy and the Challenge of Spiritual Engagement, which won the Prager International Book of the Year Award in 2011. I'll also add that Dr. Johnston wrote and delivered the Navy Chaplain Corps PDTC back in 2001, which was titled The Impact of Religion on Culture and Politics Across the International Spectrum. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Doug Johnston.
Well, thank you, Zach, for that kind introduction, and thank you all for the for the opportunity to exchange insights on such an important topic as we are facing today. Back in 2001, as Zach mentioned, I had the task of heading up a 4-person team that went around the world and trained chaplains, both the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard chaplains in religion and statecraft. And this was largely with an eye toward enhancing the conflict prevention capability of the Sea Service Commands, which are often at the cutting edge of our overseas involvements. And in the course of that, we focused quite a bit on establishing relationships of trust with local religious leaders and on exactly what can be done in terms of advising commanders on the cultural and religious implications of decisions they're about to take. Well, there's been a lot of water under the bridge since then, and in 2005, with the publication of Joint Publication 1-05, it was a huge step forward because in the context of providing doctrinal guidance for the role of religion in supporting joint military operations, the rules of engagement for military chaplains were expanded as was needed, very needed, and pointed out in that early training that we conducted. And since then, I think that the other thing that really came out in that early training was the need for specialized training, both for chaplains and for military commanders. And there, I think we still have a problem because the training that's been provided to date has been somewhat sporadic and ad hoc in nature in both camps. But I think it's probably the Army is doing the best job in this area so far. But frankly, I think that every service, the Chaplains Corps should have a subspecialty in religion and culture provided as part of their training for those chaplains who are drawn to this idea of advising the military commanders. Very important. Well, despite any shortcomings in the training, there were a number of interventions taking place in both Iraq and Afghanistan that were often the results of chaplains taking the lead and then securing the authorization from their military commanders. And that worked well, but in some cases it was the military commanders taking the initiative too. But an awful lot was done in that area. And one of the, a person that I happen to know who's now the chaplain of the House of Representatives, Margaret Gibbon, went on to become Chief of Navy Chaplains. She was in the Marine Corps, a billet assigned in Afghanistan, and was very, very much a part of that kind of activity that I just described. Well, I think that when I asked Zach what all they would like to see in the course of my remarks, one challenge that he threw out there that I thought was rather important was that of what can the military chaplains do to fill the void that's been created by the all but total elimination of the government's strategic religious involvement capabilities. Is pretty much wiped out. And I think that what we might want to consider doing is, we talked about conflict prevention earlier, but conflict resolution I think is something that a place that we could examine and I think make some good contributions. Now, our guidance, chaplain guidance, says little, if anything, about conflict resolution, but this is in contrast to the guidance you find in Norway and Canada, for example. Those are two countries that are very well known for their peacemaking efforts around the world. But their guidance to their chaplains endorses this activity in a very strong way. Even the United States has dabbled in this itself at points along the way. Going back in history to 1898, when we were involved in the Spanish-American War in the Philippines, then General John Blackjack Pershing sent his chaplain to interact with the religious clergy, Catholic clergy in the North, and the Muslim leaders in the South to temper the hostilities. And that seemed to work pretty well. And then some 65 years later, you find the French, as they're trying to take over in Algeria, when they were in very tight situations, their military commanders would send out their chaplains to negotiate with the Muslim insurgents. So even the authors of secularism understood the need to deal effectively with religious imperatives. So I think the challenge right now is to think of how you as chaplains might enter this arena and do something that you haven't been necessarily doing in the past. And I think that I would just invite you, hopefully inspire you to think creatively and expansively about what roles you might be able to play in this area. And I think it should be done through a very deliberate practice of empathy. Now, empathy is not sympathy, but empathy is doing the hard work of trying to understand. Let's say you're establishing that relationship of trust with your local religious leaders, but it's to try to understand how those leaders and their followers, how they view the problem at hand that you're dealing with, and exactly why they think the way they do. You're trying to put yourself in their moccasins, looking at the problem through their side of the prism, in addition to your own. And those differences might be economic or political in nature. They might have to do with religious or ethnic differences, or even some unresolved wound of history. But once you start making that effort, you become aware of commonalities on which you then can possibly build to try to start bridging the differences. But it's just a very important thing that we do, but we don't do enough of it. Our foreign policy, for example, when we run into nation states that we disagree with, oftentimes we start to try to dehumanize them rather than practicing empathy. And until we introduce empathy into our foreign policy in a very effective way, I think we stand to experience a lot of unintended consequences, as has been the case in the past. One example was the fall of the Shah in Iran in 1979. When former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara was asked what was the most important lesson out of Vietnam War, he said the need to empathize with the enemy. And I'll just read from a quick quote of his from his book, In Retrospect. He says, "Our misjudgment of friend and foe alike reflected our profound ignorance of the history, culture, and politics of the people in the area." And that's something where I think you all are superbly equipped to address yourselves. Shortly thereafter, the coalition authority attempted to impose a peace accord in Iraq, and it was dead on arrival because it had no input from Ayatollah Sistani, who was the leading religious figure in the country at the time. So one thing I would say too is that I think that you are uniquely equipped in this whole area because empathy lies at the heart of strategic religious engagement. One of the more impressive ways to make this work is to show respect for the religious values of the other parties involved. When you do that, it makes a huge difference in terms of them opening up to you in ways that you wouldn't ordinarily expect. Give you a quick example of this. At one point, when our NGO was reforming the madrasas, the religious schools in Pakistan, I took two of our leaders over to, our two board members over to visit three madrasas that had been clearly identified with terrorism. And the first one of these was a madrasa outside of Karachi. We walked in, and the room was full of seasoned scholars and tough-minded Muslim madrasa leaders and the like. And there was a lot of rage. The rage was there because of the conflict that was going on in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah at the time. And anything that Israel does, the United States gets credit for. So I had to work past that, pointing out to them that the U.S. had intervened on behalf of Muslims in Bosnia, Somalia, Kuwait, and others. And once we got past that, I said, that's not why we're here today, though. We're here today to see if we can call upon religious values we share in common to develop a friendship. And I said, and at that point, I quoted from the Quran, a collective paraphrase of which was, oh, mankind, God could have made you one had he willed, but he didn't. He made you into separate nations and tribes that you may know one another, cooperate with one another, and compete with one another in good works. I said, I and my two colleagues are here to open the competition in good works. And then, consistent with our practice of faith-based diplomacy, I told them, I said, the three of us happen to be followers of Jesus. We know you cannot be a good Muslim unless you believe some pretty wonderful things about Jesus. So I said, let's ask ourselves, if he were in our presence today, how would he want us to interact? And over the course of the next hour, that rage slowly converted to total acceptance, bordering on fellowship. It was really remarkable to behold. But in the wake of it, our project director told me that he heard an audible sigh in the room after I quoted from the Quran, because that was the rage defusing because of this respect shown to their values. And this is the sort of thing that you do every day. So I'm very hopeful that we can capitalize on that in some way. There's a lot yet to be done to make this, to realize the full potential of the Chaplain Corps, because I think it's tremendous potential. But I still think very keenly that we need that training to go along with it. And I will say this too in closing, that if you're able to make headway in either conflict prevention or conflict resolution, I think it will undoubtedly give you much greater peace of mind than one of your other customary duties of dealing with the casualties after conflict has erupted. But thank you for what you do, and thank you for this time talking to you. Look forward to your comments.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnston. Again, what an honor it was to have you with us here. Now we're going to move into our first panel discussion entitled Military Chaplains and Strategic Religious Engagements in the Indo-Pacific. The goal of this discussion is to level set our understanding of current DOW chaplain SRE efforts within US Indo-PACOM. And so to do that, I'm going to introduce our panel moderator, Captain David Yang, and then turn it over to him to lead the discussion. As a reminder, following this panel will be a 10-minute Q&A session. So feel free to write your name, affiliation, and question in the chat box anytime during the panel. So without further ado, Captain David Yang has been the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Chaplain since 2004. Prior to this job, he was the U.S. 7th Fleet Chaplain, Naval Forces Japan Chaplain, Joint Region Marianas Chaplain, and Carrier Strike Group 5 Chaplain. He's an ordained Southern Baptist minister with a Bachelor of Arts from Richmond University and a Master of Divinity and a Doctor of Philosophy from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He also has a Master's in National Security and Strategic Studies from the Naval War College. Chaplain Yang has taught adjunctly at the U.S. Naval Academy, Central Baptist College, Southern Baptist Seminary, and the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. So Chaplain Yang, over to you, sir, and your panel.
Well, thanks, Zach. Aloha from sunny Hawaii. Hope you can all see me and hear me. Wave your hand there, Chaplain Shabazz, if you can hear me. Awesome. That means you can see me and hear me. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to address this particular panel, and I'll be followed by my esteemed colleagues from various chaplaincies around here in the Pacific, namely here in Indo-PACOM area here in Hawaii. But let me start off with the my introductory remarks. Strengthening alliances and partnerships it remains one of the top 3 priorities established by the commander of U.S. Indo-PACOM. The other 2 priorities are advancing all-domain dynamic combat power and enhancing presence and resilience. Together, these priorities reinforce our overarching objective, strengthening deterrence and preserving a free, open, secure, and stable Indo-Pacific. The advancement of alliances and partnerships does not solely occur within the integrated defense arena through the efforts of our joint warfighters. It also occurs through the strategic work of chaplains conducting religious key leader engagements, or RKLEs, the term we used in the Indo-Pacific, to describe engagements with both our military and civilian allies and partners. In our context today, it is synonymous with the term strategic religious engagements, or SREs. Regardless of the terminology used, the central idea remains the same. Chaplains intentionally seek opportunities to engage with leaders at many levels, including military leaders, religious leaders, government officials, civic leaders, and business leaders to foster dialogue on religious freedom, the role of faith and religion within society, and the importance of spirituality in promoting human wholeness. Chaplains are uniquely positioned to do this work. Within the military institution, there is no other entity that can engage both military and civilian partners on matters of faith, religion, spirituality, and religious freedom issues in the way chaplains can. Across the Indo-Pacific, many nations welcome chaplains simply because we are clergy. Although we wear military uniforms, sometimes in different colors and designs, our counterparts immediately recognize that we are ministers, priests, rabbis, or imams first. That identity creates immediate connection and trust. It allows us to speak a common language when discussing faith, religion, and religious liberty. and this allows the U.S. military to be viewed in a positive light. It is important to note that we conduct religious key leader engagements, not merely key religious leader engagements. The distinction is significant. The latter would limit our engagement exclusively to religious figures. RKLEs, however, enable chaplains to engage any military or civilian leader on issues related to religion, faith, ethics, spirituality, religious freedom, and moral foundations that shape societies and institutions. Under the leadership of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Chaplains Office, multiple stakeholders across the theater contribute to this mission. Service component chaplains offices, including U.S. Pacific Fleet, U.S. Pacific Air Force, U.S. Army Pacific, and Marine Force Pacific, execute alliance and partnership building efforts through RKLEs in ways aligned with their commanders' priorities and operational objectives. In addition, partners such as the U.S. Coast Guard and the National Guard actively contribute to this effort throughout the region. Through the State Partnership Program alone, National Guard units maintain relationships with 15 countries across the Indo-Pacific. This provides tremendous opportunities for chaplaincy engagement to deepen trust, strengthen interoperability, and reinforce enduring people-to-people connections. Following my remarks, you will hear from each of our service component chaplains as they describe their respective efforts and mission sets. While their approaches may differ, all of us share the same strategic objective, advancing the Indo-PACOM commander's vision for stronger alliances and partnerships throughout the region. By leveraging these opportunities collectively, chaplaincy across the Indo-Pacific continue to build upon one another's efforts, Navy and Army working together, Air Force and Marine Corps working together, and ultimately the entire joint chaplaincy enterprise operating in unity. Together, we seek to promote peace, prosperity, human dignity, spiritual resilience, and the fundamental freedom to practice one's faith. As a result, trust continues to grow with nations across the Indo-Pacific theater. And in this region, trust matters, relationships matter, presence matters. As you may hear from other briefers, Indo-PACOM maintains an expanding repository of after-action reports, AARs, and lessons learned from various RKLEs conducted throughout the theater. These reports are housed within a centralized SharePoint portal maintained by the Pacific Fleet Chaplains Office. Our goal is not merely to achieve engagements, but to build institutional knowledge, learning from previous efforts, identifying present opportunities, and shaping the future of strategic religious engagements across the Indo-Pacific. In addition to our own U.S. military efforts, we are also strengthening collaboration with international chaplaincy partners. We have been engaged in ongoing dialogue with partners such as Australia and New Zealand to determine how we can better coordinate efforts throughout the South Pacific. We believe that by consolidating our efforts and sharing best practices, we can achieve far greater collective impact. The future of RKLEs in the Indo-Pacific is exceptionally promising. We have already accomplished much, but significant opportunities still lie ahead. As a strategic competition in the region continues to evolve, the role of chaplaincy engagement will remain increasingly relevant in building trust, strengthening partnerships, and advancing stability throughout the theater. With that, let me now turn it over to our service component chaplains in the following order: PAC Fleet, PAC-AF, USER-PAC, MARFOR-PAC, and Coast Guard Pacific Area. Following these gentlemen, I've asked Chaplain Steve Yarber from 9th Mission Support Command to share with us on extensive work he and his team of chaplains have done with the South Pacific countries as well. Mahalo, thank you. Let me turn it over to Chaplain Sennett over at PAC Fleet.
Hey, good afternoon. When we think of strategic competition on the world stage, we often picture diplomats in quiet rooms or carrier strike groups on high seas. But today, I want to talk about a different kind of strategic actor, one that operates at a very heart of the communities and plays a vital role in advancing U.S. interests. Our United States Navy chaplains in the Pacific. Last year, the President released a new national security strategy, and it calls for vigilant posture in the Indo-Pacific, not just to win conflict, but to prevent it. It's built on the fundamental principle of peace through strength. That's a powerful phrase, peace through strength. But we must ask ourselves, what is the nature of this strength? Is it measured only in military might or economic dominance? The strategy itself suggests a deeper source. The NDS identifies America's unrivaled soft power as a key component of its strength, with alliances and partners acting as the primary vehicle for projecting this influence. Working collaboratively with partners, the U.S. demonstrates a commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific based on mutual respect, international law, and shared values. This stands as a stark contrast to the coercive models offered by our competitors. As U.S. Navy chaplains, we play a unique and vital role in this effort through what the Department of War calls religious key leader engagements. We connect with spiritual and community leaders across the Indo-Pacific on a profound and human level. By engaging with this leader, we bridge cultural divides, foster mutual understanding, and build the relational infrastructure that strong alliances rely on. Moreover, understanding that within the Indo-Pacific nations, faith is central to the identity and social structure. For that reason, shared religious heritage could be a strategic advantage, and chaplains are uniquely positioned to leverage it. For instance, last year, a U.S. Navy chaplain that we all know and the U.S. ambassador for the Federated States of Micronesia convened a interfaith workshop. Together, they were doing more than talking about community infrastructure needs. They were building a coalition of trusted religious leaders committed to collaborative solutions for challenges like education and youth development. These type of dialogues strengthen a nation from within, making them more resistant to the financial overtures and the maligning influences of our adversaries. Here, chaplains serve as a strategic instrument of foreign policy, and our Navy chaplains are contributing to a sophisticated form of public diplomacy. Today, I'd like to highlight two specific areas of operation where chaplains engage with religious leaders to directly impact our national security strategy. First is Pacific Partnership, and then second is our overseas warship port calls. Pacific Partnership is the largest U.S. Navy annual humanitarian and disaster relief preparedness mission in the Indo-Pacific. While its focus is often on medical and engineering readiness, a key part of its success lies in building deep and lasting relationships. As discussed, in many Pacific Island nations, faith is not just part of life, it is central to it. Faith communities are the bedrock of society. Recognizing this, Pacific Partnership integrates chaplains into its mission for strategic religious engagement. In this capacity, chaplains serve three distinct roles. First, they are connection builders. Chaplains organize interfaith dialogue. They bring together religious leaders, government officials, and NGOs. As seen during the workshop in Micronesia, these events create spaces for open communication and collaborative problem solving. Second, our Navy chaplains are cultural advisors. They provide invaluable insight into the local religious landscape, helping U.S. teams and the commander to understand and respect the spiritual context of the communities they are attempting to partner. By engaging respectfully with local cultural and religious values, we demonstrate our commitment to shared values. Third, chaplains are force multipliers. Working alongside medical and engineering teams, they help organize host nation outreach events. Last year in Vanuatu, chaplains combined English literature training, medical and band events, creating a holistic and an impactful engagement for the entire community. Pacific Partnership drives engagements like these at multiple nations throughout the IPC. This year alone, we will be in Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Timor-Leste. The second operational engagement is our overseas port calls. When U.S. Navy warships visit a foreign nation, the ship chaplain is often tasked with partnering with embassy staff to engage the local religious community. For instance, in September of 2025, during the USS Blue Ridge port call, 22 sailors participated in a cultural and a religious tour of the Busan, in Busan, Republic of Korea. The tour included visits to Tongdo Sa and Hong Buf Sa Buddhist temples. The engagements were significant successes because it allowed our sailors to learn about the Korean culture and religious history. They expanded connections with the Korean allies through mutual hospitality and fostered a greater understanding and appreciation of Korean history. In conclusion, our Navy chaplain mission of conducting religious key leader engagement is a critical element in forging the bedrock of our strategic alliances. When chaplains sit down with village elders, a local imam, a Buddhist monk, or a regional bishop, we are engaging in a spiritual diplomacy. We are demonstrating that America's strength isn't just in our ships and warships, but in our values and our willingness to listen and understand. Through RKLEs, we connect with those who shape the hearts and the minds of their community. And we discover that the desire for peace, for family, and for a better future are universal values. And by engaging in this profound human level, we build the bonds of trust that help ensure a free, open, and secure Indo-Pacific. Mahalo, and thank you.
Chaplain Munoz from PACAF.
Aloha, everyone. This is Chaplain Munoz from PACAF. Good afternoon. Today I will be briefing on our religious key leader engagements within PACAF in relationship to the countries of Australia, the Philippines, and indirectly with South Korea. Part of our commitment to the Indo-Pacific is to invest heavily in enhancing interoperability within our allies and partners in the region. However, to truly sustain our asymmetrical advantage in this theater, we must focus on the center of gravity, that is the human spirit. The moral, ethical, and spiritual resilience of our service members and multinational forces form the absolute foundation of our joint operational endurance success. Through our recent multinational engagements, we evaluated how our allied chaplains corps can seamlessly integrate to protect and fortify this critical domain. To illustrate the strategic value of our multinational collaboration, we have framed our approach and operational path forward around three core capabilities. Number one, spiritual fitness. Number two, religious accommodations. And number three, advising leadership. The first capability is a spiritual fitness. When we focus on the center of gravity, the human spirit, we must intentionally condition the spiritual and moral resilience of our multinational forces. Within this capability, we are focusing on the following. Number one, unified crisis intervention. Military forces across the globe face significant operational stress and mental health challenges. By sharing our most effective tactical level crisis intervention and suicide prevention frameworks with our partner nations, we elevate the resiliency of our entire coalition. Equipping allied chaplains with intervention tools ensures all service members receive high quality proactive care. Number two, force multiplication through enlisted support. A critical component of expanding spiritual fitness is the development of robust enlisted religious support structures. PACAF chaplains have shared frameworks for enlisted personnel to help our partners and allies to build peer-to-peer intervention capabilities. This empowers the enlisted force and exponentially multiplies the reach of spiritual care across the entire multinational formation. Number three, preparation for high-stress environments. Spiritual fitness must be stress tested before a crisis. By integrating allied chaplains into complex multinational exercises, we are developing a combined doctrine for spiritual triage and trauma response. Building at the field of integration, we are advancing trilateral integration to establish a common operating picture on how chaplains operate in mass casualty scenarios. The second capability involves the complex guidance and policies surrounding religious accommodations. Number one, establishing safe havens for counsel. The foundation of pastoral care is confidentiality, but our allied nations operate under varying legal frameworks regarding confidentiality and mandatory reporting. A major focus of our multinational collaboration within the Pacific is bridging this policy gap. We are holding conversation with our allies on how we can establish a common operating picture to better our understanding of our differences and similarities, ensuring our service members are fully aware of these limitations before seeking allied pastoral care. Number two, cross-border pastoral care. By creating a formal frameworks for mutual support, allied chaplains and locally contracted clergy can step up to provide targeted religious rights and services when a nation's organic assets are geographically unavailable. The final capability centers on the chaplain corps' vital role in advising leadership. Within this capability, we are focusing on the following. Number one, aligning military cultures. Effective joint operations require an intuitive understanding of partner nations' mindsets. Through these engagements, our PACAF office has identified key differences in how our partnered militaries view their operational identities, ranging from combat-focused to humanitarian-focused. By advising leadership and these cultural nuances, we can better align our joint doctrines, training scenarios, and strategic messaging to resonate with all partnered forces. Number two, strategic access through outreach. Chaplains possess unique capabilities for civil-military engagement. By leading joint community relations and humanitarian outreach events, our multinational chaplaincy have built immense trust with local populations in Australia and the Philippines. Chaplains advise commanders on how community outreach events foster deep goodwill that traditional staff functions cannot achieve. In conclusion, enhancing interoperability within PACAF requires that our allied forces are fully supported in the human spirit by actively collaborating to strengthen spiritual fitness, secure equitable religious accommodations, and provide unified guidance through advising leadership. We ensure that our multinational coalition of allies of chaplains maintains a relentless focus on the center of gravity, that is, the human spirit. And that's all for me.
Thank you, Chaplain Munoz. We'll now shift over to U.S. Army Pacific, Chaplain Shabazz.
Hey, good afternoon. Hey, thank you guys for the invite, Chaplain Yang. And I want to say, starting off, Dr. Johnston, that was a great quote from the Quran. It's one that we use most certainly in interfaith dialogue. So thank you for that. I want to talk today really about General Clark's lines of effort, people, partners, and prevail. I want to make 5 points. We're going to kind of mix in some personal KLEs, but the first point really is about building trust through shared values, people and partners. Key leader engagements by religious support teams foster trust and highlighted shared moral values and ethical values. In the Pacific, where diverse cultures and faiths intersect, chaplains and religious leaders serve as real bridges. In our SRPT that we had a couple of weeks ago, all of the commanders were saying like sensors. When I think sensors, I mean, that term probably could be debated, but I liked it in the sense where we were building bridges and promoting mutual respect and understanding among U.S. forces and partner nations. Trust is fundamental and foundational to strong relationships and mission success. Religion can be a bridge of understanding to fill in those gaps. I think that's important for us to understand. Second, enhancing interoperability and cultural competencies, our partnerships with folks in the region. We do in the Army, we do religious area analysis, right? And this is where we go in, before we go into any region, we go in and try to understand the culture, the religion, the folkways, and the mores, and then we take that back to our commander to give them assessment based upon that region. So the religious support professionals help leaders understand spiritual and cultural dynamics of our allies, right? So this awareness really enhances interoperability, ensuring that joint operations are sensitive to local customs, beliefs, and religious observances, such as cultural competence. It's crucial for seamless collaboration and effective partnerships. I remember being in CENTCOM and October 7th hit, and the overwhelming thought among the commanders when I was working for General Carrilla, and he asked the question, why are these people following Hezbollah? I mean, I don't understand. Why don't they just break for them? And he kind of looked at me, and I said, well, sir, Hezbollah was the financier of these folks in the region. So if they break from Hezbollah, not only would they cut off financially, they may be killed. And he kind of sat back in his chair and said, wow, I never thought of it like that, because our democracy is not like that. And that's kind of a theocracy there. So I was able to kind of get him to understand the culture there and shift the kind of thought process in the room. We went to Malaysia here probably about 3 weeks ago for, 3 months ago for IPAM. Right now, obviously, it's pretty much an Islamic country. So you do the analysis of that country before you go in. Our team here went in 3 days prior to the commander. Why is this important? Because we wanted to set the groundwork and the spiritual component before the commander got there. So obviously we went on, I shouldn't say obviously, but the Islamic Day of Worship is Friday. We set our schedule for Wednesday. We got there on Thursday, got us some downtime, and then we went to the mosque on Friday. Why is that important? That's important because the king, the four-star generals, the prime ministers, all of these folks come to Friday prayer. So we were able to sit down with them, talk with them, pray with them, and help them understand our role as an imam in the military, but U.S. and our relations with them. I think this, when you're talking about interoperability and cultural competence, in this instance, being an imam and understanding the thought process helped in being a USAPAC chaplain. So the third point I want to make, strengthening resilience and morale. This is the people component. So when engaging with the key leaders on our religious and spiritual matter, it boosts the resilience and morale in both the U.S. personnel and our partners, because we have shared values through support activities such as interfaith services, humanitarian outreach, and there was a demonstration of solidarity there. Like our brother Mint talked about earlier about the NGOs, the State Department. We got a chance to sit down with them and reinforce some bonds between allied and supporting the well-being of all those involved. When we deployed out of RCENT, I was the RCENT Command Chaplain, we deployed to Qatar. Afghanistan had just fell, so we got a chance to go there, and the people were in kind of topsy-turvy because they were displaced from Afghanistan and they were in Qatar. I think we had 5,000 Afghans there. So again, in this instance, being able to speak the language and understand the culture, while the commanding general, General Clark, was talking to the high-level people, I was over with the families reciting the Quran, and I tell you, you got a big, large gathering over there, and it brought them some measure of solace. The funny part of that, General Clark said, "Hey, what are you saying to them?" I said, "Sir, I was just singing them a lullaby," right? But it was great that the commanding general had a person on his staff that understood the culture and was able to speak to them in their language. Okay, the fourth point that I have here, when you're talking about religious support teams, it's really about identifying the potential sources of religious and cultural tension before they escalate. Dr. Johnston talked about that. Sometimes it's heated on both sides. So how do you go into that situation and quell the fears? He gave a great example about being a follower of Jesus Christ. Now, he couldn't have gone in that situation and didn't know that the Muslims actually believe and put Jesus Christ at a high level. Had you gone into those situations and didn't have a cultural competency of what the other folks believe, then you would have just escalated the tension. So as chaplains and religious affairs specialists, it is very important to go in there and have a cultural competence. And I'll give you an example of maybe I'll take the hit on this because I made some assumptions. We were in Jordan, so I brung my team into Jordan, and we met with the local mufti and some of his staff. Well, the meeting was going great, and then we had a E7, a female E7, and I tell you, everything was going smooth. And then she asked the mufti, "Why do you have 4 wives?" I tell you, I almost melted in my seat, right? That's not a question really that you're asking in trying to interfaith dialogue like that. It's part of the culture of Islam, it's part of the culture of the Muslims there. And I tell you, the whole tenor of the meeting changed. And when we got back in the van, she was so sorry that she asked the question, but she was asking the question really from an American point of view as juxtaposed to what their culture believes. So I'll take the hit on that. I probably should have kind of briefed my team to keep it, really about our shared values as juxtaposed to our differences. So my fifth point as I close here, we'll talk about strategic influence and long-term partnerships. That's the prevail piece. Effective key leader engagement in the religious domain extends U.S. influence. It's talking about soft influence, demonstrating respect for the spiritual dimension of our lives. All of us have a spiritual dimension. It doesn't matter what your faith background is. It doesn't matter where you come from. This approach really lays the groundwork for enduring partnerships as allies and not just military power, but nation building in the sense of values of faith, dignity, and mutual respect, and ensuring that we prevail together long term. This key leader engagement we had in Malaysia, it went so well. We spent 3 days with them, not only at the mosque, they invited us out to dinner. They gave us a briefing of their military structure. And then in turn, Sergeant Major and I gave them a briefing of our military chaplaincy, and they wanted to model their chaplaincy based upon ours because their chaplaincy is just Islamic chaplains. And when we explained to them that we had not only Christian chaplains, we had rabbis, we had Buddhists, we did have a Hindu, they were fascinated by that because even though the country is mostly Islamic, there are also some outliers there that wanted to join the military as well, but they didn't have a source for them to become chaplains. So we introduced that into them. Later on, they got the chance to talk to our chief of chaplains. And the same thing we also did in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia wanted to model their chaplaincy after ours. They actually sent somebody to Chobik to actually finish the chaplain school at Chobik. So again, thank you guys for the invitation. I hope we've given you something from our area of expertise to help. Thank you again for the invite.
Thanks, Chaplain Shabazz. Let's turn over to Chaplain Hall over at MAR4 PAC.
Greetings from Marine Forces Pacific. I just want to say I appreciate being put on the tail end of an eloquent bunch of people and describing what chaplains do in the context of Marine Corps ministry. Our focus at MAR4 PAC as the service component provider of Marines to Indo-PACOM is building, and then secondarily through building of relationships through our host nation outreach events. We do this through a robust exercise calendar throughout the year. We have exercises that several of us across the joint services will be working in together. For example, Balikatan is in the Philippines. It's wrapping up kind of as we speak. We have multiple RMTs, religious ministry teams, from our 2 operational major commands, that being 1st Marine Expeditionary Force out of Southern California and Arizona, and 3 Marine Expeditionary Force out of Okinawa, Japan, mainland Japan, and Hawaii. So we have exercise RMTs from 1 and 3 MEF at Balikatan right now. We just had several RMTs come back from Korea, where they worked with their Korean partners, both in KMEP and Freedom Shield. And we have chaplains and RMTs that are getting ready to go out to Palau for Koa Moana. So throughout our exercises, we frequently have our chaplains and RMTs doing interoperability and relationship building with their partners in our partners and allies, providing services where together where they are able to, particularly, for example, in the Philippines, they have robust Catholic capabilities, which sadly we don't have quite as many Catholic chaplains available, and so we get the opportunity to cross-pollinate, if you will. We also support religious key leader engagements through Marine Expeditionary Unit deployments. So as Chaplain Stennett mentioned, they have ships going out and deploying. Well, the amphibious ships will have religious ministry teams from Marine Expeditionary Units embarked, and they go on 3 to 6 plus month deployments where they hit different ports of call. They do exercises with allies and partners, and then they do just port visits where they get to do cultural understanding tours. In all of this, our focus is truly building those relationships, which is the key to what religious ministry is about, both our relationship individually with the divine, and then our relationship with our partners and allies. Barring any questions, that's really all I have. So I will sign out now.
Thanks, Chaplain Hall. Now we'll turn over to the Coast Guard side, Chaplain Dave Stroud.
Hello all, greetings from Alameda, California. Thank you for having me here, allowing me to represent the Coast Guard efforts. Really, the Coast Guard's efforts in this area are really in their beginning stages. Really began shortly before I got here, and very much so once I got here and was put on this task of seeing what we could do in this area to contribute. Right now, our efforts are really focused on partnering with Coast Guard cutter Harriet Lane. And Harriet Lane is a Coast Guard cutter that she's home ported in Pearl Harbor. But her reason for being is to build relationships throughout the South Pacific through various she undertakes various missions that she joins in with island nations and other nations in the Pacific, and we have chosen to make that our focus. And so to have a chaplain available with the ship when she deploys, and to include religious leader engagements. And honestly, our hurdles that we've been crossing so far have been mostly within our own house. Just getting our planners, getting our operators to think about us, that this is an opportunity that we have. Think about the skills that we bring, the opportunities we bring to the Harriet Lane mission. And I feel like we have made some significant headway there. We're not having to remind them all the time about what we have to offer. It's becoming something that's assumed as a part of it, which I count as a great success. And that was not how it was. So that has been a great place. We have had some pretty minor communities in RKLE, Tonga and Fiji come to mind, and but they have definitely added a new dimension to the Harriet Lane mission and given them another way to connect with people there. It has been very positive so far, and we're looking forward for that to get off the ground and really become a permanent fixture in that mission. Harriet Lane deploys twice a year. There's a great deal of the Pacific, and it's really integrated into all of it. It does seem, as I have talked to others and as we have explored, that perhaps the Coast Guard has kind of a niche that we can fill in this area, in the sense that I think the Coast Guard is able to connect with some nations, locations in ways that perhaps the services of the Department of War cannot. And put it simply, some places would rather have the small white ship in their harbor rather than the big gray one. So we are able to have an inroad into some of those places, and we are excited to move ahead in that area to utilize that special place that the Coast Guard holds. And I think it's a great opportunity for the Coast Guard to fill that spot and expand its effectiveness, building relationships in the Pacific and representing the United States. So really excited about what the future is going to hold for us. Very grateful to PAC Fleet and to Indo-PACOM for the support that they've given to us, for the leadership that they've given to us as we have tried to get these things. And we're excited about it. We're looking forward to it. And I offer, we are interested in any opportunities that any of you have that you think the Coast Guard might bring some value to. So feel free to reach out. We are ready to engage. That's all I have. Any questions? Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dave. As Dave mentioned, that we are very excited about the opportunity that we have to partner together with the Coast Guard side, as they have a capability, particularly over in the South Pacific. Speaking of which, I'm going to turn over to Chaplain Steve Yarber from 9th MSC to talk about their work that they have done extensively over at the South Pacific side. Chaplain Yarber?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. We are certainly part of a team effort, and one of the things that the 9th uses the 9th Mission Support Command chaplains to do is to build sustainable relationships with our PIC counterparts and to set religious conditions that support a free and open Indo-Pacific. So everything that we do centers off of that. Over the last several years, we've been doing religious leader engagements for the last 5 years. Just give you some general numbers from from 23 and 24. In FY23, we did 153. We engaged with 153 specific civilian religious leaders. In FY24, we engaged with 225 religious leaders from the different island nations there around the South Pacific and Oceania. And the goal of that was, as you've already heard, everybody else has said, to enhance the faith-based engagements, which sets us apart from, obviously, from our adversaries who are atheists, because it enables us to go in, and we've done training with different local leaders on suicide prevention. We've trained them on combating domestic violence. We've gone into schools and spoken in schools, and we've had a lot of also even requests to help with emergency management and relief organizations that go in from these different countries, and how faith and chaplains and religious leaders, sort of a DISCA flavor to it, and how chaplains and religious leaders can be part of the emergency management process relative to, as you know, the different storms and things that churn through the South Pacific all the time. One of the really important things that we've been able to do in the last several years is coordinate and partner with our Navy and Air Force counterparts. Zach is one who's helped us immeasurably be able to get our foot in the door in certain places. And then we've also been talking to the Air Force and the Navy folks that are going out, because, as you know, when people in these island nations see an American military uniform, they think that we're all the same and that we all talk to each other. And unfortunately, we understand that that's not always the case. Many times we don't talk to each other. And so being able to coordinate, which we've worked at trying to do over the last 2 years, of who's where and who's doing what, and so that we can multiply efforts and not be redundant in our efforts, and make sure that we have a consistent messaging, I think has been very important. And so we've, in the last couple of years, we've been able to also lean into some of our exercise support and engage with some mill engagements with some of the other chaplain corps. I know that this past year and even this coming year, my deputy is headed to Papua New Guinea, where he's been having some really good interactions with the chaplain corps there. The Fijian chaplain corps with one of our chaplains has been very fruitful for us developing that relationship, and I know several of you have been there as well. But it leans itself and lends itself into inviting these chaplains to either Hawaii or back to our chaplain center school for training and some coordination with our Army Chief of Chaplains side of the house. So pending your questions, it's been very fruitful for us, and it is something that our chaplains really enjoy doing. Over.
Thank you so much, Steve. That concludes the presentations from the chaplains here at Indo-PACOM. We will take some questions if you have any in terms of what we have just presented.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chaplain Yang, and all of the distinguished panelists. So we will open it up for Q&A. You'll see that the chat box is open. No questions in there so far, which is fine. We have 4 minutes until the next panel. So if there are any questions anybody has, they want to just turn on their mic, they're welcome to ask, or go ahead and put those in the chat box. We'll give you a couple of seconds to do so. All right, so we've got a question. Thanks so much from Chaplain Hampton. She's asking, what protocols would you suggest be put in place to ensure that the use of empathy in negotiations does not lead to over-identification with the adversary or to quote-unquote capture of the negotiator's objectivity? I think this is related a little bit to what Dr. Johnston mentioned about empathy, but also came up in the panel discussion. So one of our panelists, if you want to take that question.
Hello, Diane. I think it begins with clearly understanding who your target is as you're having these conversations, and knowing what having clear expectations about what you're trying to accomplish with the particular event. So most of our relationships in the Indo-Pacific aren't really adversarial. Most of them are very partner-esque. So when we go to Palau or we go to Papua New Guinea or any of those nations, they look to us as really religious leaders. They see the U.S. uniform and they want to have good dialogue and conversation. So I would say it begins with just knowing where you're going, knowing who you're going to talk to, and then having clear objectives when you get there. That way, you're not kind of led off into a conversation that's uncomfortable. So that would be my first thing.
Yeah, thank you, Chaplain Stennett. Okay, Lieutenant Commander Andrew Hoyle jumped in with a question. What are the biggest impediments to advancing RKLEs or strategic religious engagements in the Indo-Pacific? Somebody on the panel.
Let me address that for a little bit. In terms of, I would say the distance is one, because it's so large in terms of the areas that we are covering here, that we can't readily go into places that we would like to go on a regular basis. So that would be a difficult thing to do, given the scope of things that we are dealing with here. That would be one. Another is Steve mentioned about us working together with one another and building on top of one another's efforts, and that's what we are trying to do. And we have been making progress in that, and I think there's more we can do with that, so that we are not just repeating the same things over and over again with those nations that are hosting us as religious leaders or others, that to talk about those topics that we want to talk about, to build relationships and trust, that if we are going in, the Air Force is going in, and the Navy goes in, and the Army goes into the same place, and we are doing the same the baseline things over and over again, that's only going to burden them and make it difficult for them to host us next time. So what we want to do is have a strategy that would allow us to think about what was done, and then the recommendations based on that. Next time our next team goes in, a different service or the same service, and then we can build on that. And then on top of that, the next visit, and so on and so on. And I will say those two things, unless others have other things to say. Over.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that, Chaplain Yang. Okay. Again, my appreciation to our panelists from around the Indo-Pacific. Your wealth of knowledge and experience was a blessing to this webinar. So thank you again, gentlemen, for that. So now we're going to move to our second panel discussion. This one is titled Status of Strategic Religious Engagements Within the Policy Community. The goal of this discussion is to increase our understanding of past and current U.S. SRE efforts. To do that, I'm going to introduce our panel moderator, Melissa Nozell, and then turn it over to her to lead the discussion. As a reminder, the panel will take a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to put your questions in the chat box along with your name and affiliation. So without further ado, Melissa is a Strategic Religious Engagement Fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, where she supports an initiative dedicated to strengthening the U.S. government's capacity for SRE in the context of diplomacy, development, and defense. She served as the Senior Program Officer for Religion and Inclusive Societies at USIP, where she led initiatives to research and support effective engagement of religious actors in conflict prevention and resolution. Prior to joining USIP in 2014, Melissa supported humanitarian aid efforts for Syrian refugees in Jordan and researched religious trends in the U.S. through the Pluralism Project at Harvard University and in the Middle East through the Jordanian Interfaith Coexistence Research Center. Melissa holds a bachelor's degree from Colgate University and a Master of Theological Studies from Harvard University. Melissa, over to you and your panel.
Thank you so much, Chaplain Zumwalt. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really pleased to moderate this discussion on the current state of strategic religious engagement, or SRE, across the broader policy community. For those less familiar with the term, SRE generally refers to efforts by U.S. government actors to understand, engage, and where appropriate, to partner with religious actors and communities in support of diplomacy, development, humanitarian response, peace building, and security objectives. Over the last 2 decades, those capacities grew in different ways across agencies like the State Department, USAID, the Department of Defense, and institutions like the U.S. Institute of Peace. At Georgetown's Berkeley Center, where I've worked with the Strategic Religious Engagement Hub, we've been documenting that history and preserving some of the tools, lessons learned, and institutional memory around this work at a moment when much of that infrastructure has changed or disappeared. That includes maintaining a repository of publicly available resources and examining what continues to be useful for practitioners today, including for chaplains. I'll post a link in the chat in a moment for anyone who may be interested in exploring the resources that are there. In fact, I think it's already been posted. Thank you. One thing that comes up repeatedly in our conversations is that chaplains occupy a particularly unique space within the SRE landscape. You are religious actors yourselves, but also representatives of the U.S. government and military. That creates important opportunities for relationship building and trust, but also raises important questions about perception, legitimacy, and the role roles that vary greatly across contexts. So today's discussion is really meant to be an honest and practical conversation about where SRE currently stands across the U.S. government, academia, and civil society, what lessons still hold relevance, what we are seeing across contexts, including the Indo-Pacific, and what all of this may mean for chaplains operating in increasingly complex religious environments. We have an excellent panel to help us think through those questions from multiple perspectives, and I am very grateful for each of them for joining us today. Let me introduce our speakers. We have Dr. James Alexander, who retired in 2025 as Senior Policy Advisor for the Strategic Religious Engagement Unit at the U.S. Department of State. He focused on building collaborative efforts between diplomats and faith-based actors. Currently, he's building interfaith collaboration in the San Francisco Bay Area and continues his international efforts with roles at the Tenenbaum Center for Interreligious Cooperation and the Strategic Religious Engagement Hub at Georgetown University. His professional history stretches back through other State Department positions, academia, and the Peace Corps. He has a doctorate in political science from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Next, we have Dr. Peter Mandaville, who is a leading expert on religion and international affairs, with a primary focus on Islam and the Muslim world. He is a senior research fellow at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center, where he leads the Strategic Religious Engagement Hub, and professor of government and politics at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University, where he also serves as the director of the Abu Suleiman Center for Global Islamic Studies. He previously served in senior roles at USAID, the U.S. Institute of Peace, and the Department of State, including in the Office of Religion and Global Affairs and on the policy planning staff. Martine Miller is a mediator and conflict transformation specialist with more than 20 years of experience supporting peace building and post-conflict reconstruction efforts in over 70 countries across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. She currently serves as the president of the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy. Martine has worked alongside governments, regional organizations, UN agencies, and civil society partners around the world, and is also a lecturer and advisor with institutions including Georgetown University, American University, and Chulalongkorn University's Peace and Conflict Studies Center in Bangkok. Finally, Knox Thames is a globally recognized expert on freedom of religion or belief with more than 2 decades of experience in U.S. foreign policy, human rights advocacy, and strategic religious engagement. He currently serves as the inaugural executive director of the Everett Center for Global Religious Freedom at Dallas Baptist University and a visiting research fellow at the University of Oxford. Previously, Knox served in senior roles at the U.S. Department of State, including as the special advisor for religious minorities in the Near East and South and Central Asia, and other foreign policy commissions under the Bush, Obama, and first Trump administrations. Thank you all so much for being here. So we're framing this session around 3 core themes. First, the state of the field of SRE. Second, lessons and tools. And third, entry points, particularly for chaplains. I'll invite the panelists to respond to some questions, and I'll ask each of you as panelists to respond in about 3 minutes per question, just to keep us on track tonight. So first, I'll invite you to reflect on the following. If we look across SRE, across the US government today, what from your respective perspectives would we see? How, through your work and different vantage points within government and NGOs, have you seen SRE capacity evolve and shift? And Knox, I'll ask that in your response that you look particularly at the intersection between international religious freedom and intersections and divergence with SRE. So I will turn first to James. Thank you.
Let me get my notes up. Greetings, everybody. I am in sunny Emeryville, California, about 10 miles from where Chaplain Stroud just spoke. Really pleased to be here. Thank you, Zach, for including me with these other folks. A lot of familiar faces, former students in trainings and past training partners. So I'm really pleased to make these acquaintances again. While I'm not at state anymore, I continue to work in the field in various ways, and I'm in periodic contact with former colleagues. And I can really just say that this moment is particularly challenging for the type of work that a lot of us were doing in the past. And what we've seen is really a drastic decline in direct engagement of faith communities by our U.S. foreign policy institutions, at least on the civilian side. Now, I left the department in spring 2025, and
and my SRE unit at the Department of State had already been dissolved, but it wasn't really a factor of a new administration coming in. It really failed mostly because it had lost high-level official support, whether from high-level officials at state or from the White House for SRE activity. I was in the tail end of the Religion and Global Affairs Office. We merged into the Office of International Religious Freedom in 2019 and were renamed the Strategic Religious Engagement Unit. But at the time we joined, in fact, the writing was really already on the wall. Action on International Religious Freedom has a congressional mandate. SRE has never had that mandate. And as we all know, as bureaucrats or former bureaucrats, those are simple bureaucratic realities that mean a lot. Ultimately, this has had a negative impact on a collaborative training program that a series of Army chaplain fellows, including Lieutenant Chaplain Chip Satterley, who'll speak on the next panel. Hey, Chip. And that we developed for Army chaplains at the Army Schoolhouse. And it's been cut back dramatically, and it's not really focusing on religious engagement anymore. And we might say that the elimination of USAID is a real blow to SRE work, particularly given how development work really lends itself to local projects. Now, SRE seems to be primarily done by military chaplains, particularly the Navy and the Pacific, though I expect we might hear something from other Army chaplains on the next panel on that. The work that Zach and others have been doing with faith communities in Pacific Island countries has included embassies. And so where we've lost a certain measure of activity from the State Department in many ways, the fact that the chaplains are working with the embassies gives me hope that there's going to be a loop back to bringing state diplomatic and development workers into this activity again. It'll take time, however, and it's going to take some real high-level commitment in the future to make this happen. The State Department itself is somewhat adrift. We've lost a lot of staff, a number of civil service subject matter experts, I should say, and chunks of experienced FSOs are still being pushed out. There has been, from the current administration, some expressions of interest in engaging religious actors, but it has not been particularly high among priorities. What we've seen is that foreign policy decisions continue kind of a move over to 1600 Pennsylvania and the White House over time. Where I see the most real possibility, and this is something for further in the future, is the fact that many young folks these days are exiting college well prepared to do this work, with good underpinnings in religious studies, international politics, and more. Something that people of my generation, going to college and grad school in the 80s and 90s, really didn't think about, and it wasn't really advocated for. So I see that as a good possibility for the future. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, James. Peter.
Thanks very much, Melissa, and greetings, everyone. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to spend some time with all of you today. So, Melissa, you asked for kind of reflections on the evolution of strategic religious engagement capacity within the U.S. government and interagency space as a whole. And I guess that overall, I would characterize it as uneven in scope and inconsistent in commitment. I'm in the position of having had the opportunity to work on SRE at all three of the United States Institute of Peace, the U.S. Department of State, and the U.S. Agency for International Development. And you know, over the last 40 years, starting with USIP's pioneering work in this area in the late 1980s, up to the present day, where we find ourselves in a very odd situation in which the administrative restructuring of the federal government over the last year has resulted in a situation where all of the dedicated institutional capacity for doing this work within executive branch agencies like USIP, State Department, and USAID has been lost. You know, we find ourselves, I think, having to deal with, well, we find ourselves having to, on the one hand, pat ourselves on the back for having made a lot of progress in the last 30 years in terms of moving from a situation in which putting forward at somewhere like the Department of State the idea that American diplomats might want to engage with religious actors was seen as, you know, not only questionable, but potentially a kind of dangerous and problematic proposition, to a point more recently where, you know, there wasn't so much a fundamental question of whether the U.S. government should engage with religious actors around the world, but how, and how to do that most effectively. So I think we have made some distinct progress. You know, the challenge we face now in the kind of current moment where the institutional capacity, you know, is no longer there, means that we have to kind of have a set of difficult conversations about what it would mean and what it would look like to kind of rebuild that capacity in the future. Let's remember that we reached arguably a high point in 2013 when the White House itself, when the National Security Council developed and released a national strategy for engaging religious leaders in U.S. foreign policy, right? So that in theory was a mandate, you know, directly from the White House for the interagency to do this work. It wasn't, however, followed up in terms of any kind of concerted effort to implement the vision that was in it. And as James so aptly observed, in the absence of that formal mandate, it's very difficult to make the case for doing this kind of work. When I say that our efforts have been kind of uneven in scope, I'm kind of alluding to the idea that you know, depending on which government agency you're talking about, you will actually find a different kind of understanding and integration of SRE as part of the standard mission and workflow of that agency. This is something I experienced very acutely when I made the shift from the State Department over to USAID. The U.S. Agency for International Development had been partnering with faith-based organizations to deliver food security, public health, educational programs around the world, literally since it opened its doors in the 1960s. So at USAID, I never found anyone questioning you know, whether or not we should be working with faith-based organizations. Rather, the challenge was more about figuring out how to integrate that kind of partnership more consistently across the agency's work, but then also how to deal with a set of persistent challenges and obstacles that I think face all U.S. Government officials that are trying to do this kind of work, but which perhaps are experienced somewhat differently by our military chaplains. So in that sense, you know, I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about what's different about the work that military chaplains do in the SRE space, and what it looks like for American diplomats, development specialists, and peace builders to be doing that work. And maybe that's something we can get onto later in the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks for some of that historical perspective as well. I'll now turn to Martine to share from your perspective, particularly as one who worked alongside government, but not necessarily within government, and from your non-governmental experiences and perspectives. Thank you, Martine.
Thank you, Melissa. So I think you covered a lot of what I had written down as my own notes. So I'm not going to repeat. I would say I was at State Department under the Bureau of Human Rights and Labor many years ago under the Clinton Albright administration. At that point, and this is what Peter Peter mentioned, at that point, the conversation around religious engagement, religious freedom reports were there, but there wasn't the conversation around strategic religious engagement. In fact, that was very, that was a taboo topic. So we have really moved forward. We've done, leaps and bounds, and policy is a bit stagnated and strangled, but practice is not. And so a lot has been lost within, the government institutions over the past couple of years. At the same time, there have been a lot of lessons learned in regards to practice. And so I think our practice is much further than our policy is. And I think we're at a moment where we require a lot of reflection of what works, what hasn't worked, how do we make it better in policy and in practice? And so this is I see it as, I've been a little bit discouraged at times, but I also see it as what's our next right step? And I say that to all of our friends frequently, is what is our next right step to do even more amazing work? When USAID, USIP, a lot collapsed and moved backward a bit in the State Department, as a nonprofit that's engaged in this space, we have gotten a lot of requests of support. Many countries have been reaching out from across the Asia Pacific, all the way through MENA and through Africa and Latin America, also in European space, because we're missing that opportunity that we had within the government space. So it's very present, very real, very sought after globally. One thing I would add is, I think the way that the U.S. was thinking about strategically religious engagement from a government perspective really was at the forefront of the thinking on a global scale. So recently, about a year and a half ago, I was in Indonesia with the former ambassador of Indonesia to the United States. And we were having that conversation. And I said, the amazing thing is that it was something that was brought up and streamlined by U.S. government, but now it's something that has become a part of many governments across the world. So if you look, for instance, Finland has a very strong focus on strategic religious engagement. The European Union, the Nordic, Norway. Norway actually funded a great deal of our work in Southeast Asia around how do we support religious actors and strategic religious engagement and peacemaking across Southeast Asia. So I think we're at an inflection point, but I think we're at a point where we have the opportunity to really rethink what's worked, what hasn't, and where we go from here. And so I would really like to put us all into that thinking, process together. And I've said to, Chaplain Zach quite frequently, I'm like, okay, and what's the next step? We have this webinar, and what's our next step together? What's our next right step together? And I'm certainly honored to be here with all of you that are working in this space and very eager to learn. So when we were doing RSVPs out and the responses that came through, it was a pleasure to see those responses come through. I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Thank you so much, Martine. Knox?
Yeah, it's great to be with everyone tonight, today, or this morning, or tomorrow morning, I guess, depending where people are around the world. But this question about how does religious freedom work intersect or diverge with strategic religious engagement? Well, I would say it's interwoven, but there is a policy divergence about how the traditional SRE work engages with the IRF work, international religious freedom work, in a diplomatic setting. But I'm going to try to speak more to it for our audience of chaplains in the context of how you understand the religious landscape in your different areas of operation. So we often say in my space that religious freedom is the canary in the coal mine, because it can give you a sense of the overall human rights environment, because it's a bundled right. That for religious freedom to be fully protected and respected, by definition, a whole host of other rights have to be protected and respected as well. And so when you're doing your religious area analysis, or you're deciding your key religious leader engagement strategy, you really need to consider the religious freedom component, because it's going to give you profound insights into the operational environment in a way that perhaps other issues won't, or it'll give you a different dimension, a different color of the situation. So just to quickly unpack that, I mean, I'm speaking to a group of chaplains, but if you think about the way all the different facets of religious freedom, you think about when you go to church, mosque, temple, synagogue on your holy day, all the rights that you exercise. So of course there's freedom of belief, freedom of conscience to believe in God or higher power. But there's also freedom of assembly, the right to come together for worship or prayer. There's freedom of expression to wear distinctive religious garments, freedom of speech to give a sermon, to give a public prayer. But then there's also freedom of movement, the ability to get to the place of worship. And with that, then there needs to be legal recognition, the ability to incorporate, to then also buy property, to own the place of worship. So you see that religious freedom touches on a whole host of other rights. And so understanding how it's treated in a country that you're focused on is going to tell you a lot really quickly. It's also helpful to understand it because we're in a moment of world history where everybody is everywhere. People from different faiths, ethnicities, and backgrounds are intermixing as never before in human history. That can create great synergies, but we also can create great challenges. And it's the daily lived experience of the Indo-Pacific region. And what we know is not a fair amount of the governments aren't managing this diversity very well. If you sort of think of the whole Indo-Pac area, the western half from sort of China westward, it scores really low in the Pew Research Center. Several countries have State Department designations for religious freedom violations, and it creates different opportunities and challenges when you go to shore or when you go into a capital to engage. And so what I've talked about on the Shri Hub's website at the Berkeley Center is how to rethink strategic religious engagement, not as like a specific box for checking, but like a theme that incorporates other components. The first is, of course, relief, humanitarian assistance, development. That's when we're working with communities to meet their emergent needs or the long-term needs. But there's also the work that you guys are doing, the military. How do we bring peace? How do we bring a stable environment where there's no conflict or we're seeing a wrapping up of conflict? And this is where religious leaders and faith groups are so crucial to that. And you all know this because they have the moral authority to speak to communities in ways that politicians often can't. But then there's also the human rights component, the religious freedom component. And it's going to, understanding that will tell you how free are religious leaders to be partners, which is the last component. If a pastor, a priest, a layperson has to fear being arrested or lynched for what they say about a certain belief or challenge in a community, that's going to limit their ability to be a partner to the United States. So we need to understand these different nuances. And then with that, when you're thinking about the religious leaders to engage, understand what they're bringing to the table. Are they government selected? So then you're going to hear the official line from the government. That's going to be a way that the government communicates to you, to us, but they're often compromised. Their credibility in the community is low, whereas an independent religious actor may have a very questionable relationship with the government, may actually be, the government may be hostile to them, but you're going to get some valuable insights. But will they have the freedom to be honest with you? And then you have the question of women and youth. The folks that are usually not at the tables that you're meeting with, for their insights, for their pulse of the community. And so just to wrap up my part, I really love how the Army literature in ATP 105 talks about your role in religious advisement, and that when you get this right, your commanders, as it says here, are going to be better positioned to understand religion in an operational environment, and thus better equipped to avoid offense, and even more important, better informed of the dynamics for building relationships of trust and forming valuable partnerships. And this is where the religious freedom component is often overlooked, but it's going to give you that depth of nuance that might be lacking if you ignore it.
Thank you, Knox. And that tees us up really nicely, I think, for the next part of our conversation. And I'm actually going to take the next two sections and sort of merge them together, given our timing, and to give the panelists a little bit more of an opportunity to expand and reflect. So I'd like to invite the four of you to think a little bit about some of the tools, the best practices and approaches that have worked in your experiences on doing this SRE work. And then in particular, where do you see chaplains fitting in? What entry points do you see specifically for our audience, for U.S. military chaplains? And what are some of the risks and cautions in doing this incredibly often sensitive work of SRE, and including for those who are in uniform? I'll switch up the order a little bit, and Martine, if I may turn to you first, please.
Melissa, I was enjoying the listening to everyone else. I'm going to put 3 points up. I would say relationship from our experience, or my experience working in the space, in regards to frameworks, I would say relationships outperform frameworks. Trust is vital in the work that we do. That's been probably the most essential component of our work when we've worked in any high-risk location, has been how much an individual is trusted in that space. And so that's one of the key elements. I would say second, religious authority is layered. It's not monolith. So if we, for instance, in Afghanistan, we speak with an array of different actors because the individuals that we work with are not all thinking in the same way necessarily. Same with if we work in, Myanmar, for instance, or in the South Thailand conflict dynamics. So there's a layered engagement of religious actors, and to really map out and understand who they are and who does hold trust and authority within the spaces they work. And then the third is context is everything. It's different anywhere you go. So I know everyone says that, but it's very important to understand the context that you're working within, and what's been the historical developments, what are the present dynamics, how things are changing at any given moment, but also what do you see as the trends and trajectories that you're seeing within this space. And the other thing I want to add another part of that in regards to context. I look a lot in the work that we do at epicenters. So epicenters of conflict and distrust, and how that ripples. And I don't look at it bound by borders or bound by, community. And taking that into very strict consideration, because what happens in one place will flow elsewhere, and that is vital to the work that we do. So those are kind of the top areas I would identify. I think in regards to chaplain engagement, there are a couple of layers to that as well, because there's the chaplain, trust element, where individuals will see a chaplain and the automatic identity to that is that they're potentially a trusted figure. But there's another identity that falls under that, and that is, if you're a military chaplain, you're also automatically viewed as a part of the U.S. agenda in a lot of locations, and to understand the risk analysis of that, and to really lean forward on the trust that people feel toward a chaplain or a religious authority figure. The next is, I would say, the importance in the spaces that we work is listen first to understand. Particularly among chaplains, to not be already automatically engaged, but to really listen and understand the context that they're working within, and to understand the language, and to understand the system that you're engaged with would be very important for chaplains. And I know many of you are already talking about that. And I remember in the previous session, the mention that one of the young military members had asked a sensitive question. Sometimes if you encourage listening first, you can overcome, dynamics like that. I would say, you asked about the risks, right? I would say instrumentalization is a risk that is often felt within communities, because if that's what you're doing with a religious actor, it's felt. They'll automatically know it. Perception changes everything. So better, like, it's important to understand what the perception is of yourself or others that are entering community. And then another element is we often look at intra-religious types of tensions, but intra-religious tensions are sometimes higher than inter tensions, and to pay close attention to that as a risk factor. I think I will finish there and then feed back into anything anyone else says.
Thank you, Martine. And you raised some important points on some of the principles of religious engagement there as well. Thank you. James.
Well, I actually appreciate that I'm following Martine on this one, because she really did a nice kind of anthropological analysis in this case of trying to figure out, how do you engage with these communities? How do you talk to people? How do you create that trust, and recognizing that you are more than just this individual who is showing up in front of people. You represent so many different things. And I'll kind of take this in a different perspective, in that a kind of an experience that I had over the years working at state, that I always found sort of in conflict with my time as a Peace Corps volunteer some decades before that, in which I was working very closely with communities. And what I found, and I think that I found that also for State Department, is that frequently the most successful programs are smaller activities that focus, say, on health, governance, or environmental challenges, just examples of subjects that are really working with a village, working with a local population. The thing is that we often think big solutions, like in a place like the State Department, we think about big projects, big scale. And what I think often catches us is that we aren't getting down to the relationships that exist here, and that we need to be making sure that we have the people's buy-in, that they want to participate with us. And at times, USAID had a practice historically where they would hire religious implementing partners who would implement programs for them, but they were kind of there in a subservient role, not necessarily an equal partner. I know when Peter was there, he started to kind of move a direction towards making these religious actors more like partners, because they know the land, they know the issues, they know the people to talk to, and it's really valuable to do that. So it's getting kind of down to that sort of level. Oftentimes with the State Department perspective, when it came to at the embassy, people wanted to talk to the government, or if they were actually doing something with religious actors, and they weren't always really wanting to do that, they were talking to the bishop, they were talking to the imam at the national mosque. These people don't necessarily know what's happening on all kinds of levels in their society. And so I think it's really important to be thinking, how do we bring it down to a certain level in which you can work with people and work with people closely? And here's where I have a lot of kind of excitement about what chaplains are doing. And that's because you are very much working with communities. You're building these trusted relationships of trust. And so talking with Chaplain Zach over the past couple of years, I hear about the time he spends. I mean, he's out in these communities for weeks at times, and talking to people and engaging people. That's the sort of thing that really creates the possibility. We don't always have the time for it, but it's worth its while if we're going to be willing to spend that sort of time. So I've often looked at the state partnership programs as particularly powerful. This notion that you send these reservists to places, they have relationships over the years, and they work with regular troops as well as chaplains, and it really has potentially a big impact in the community. So stay small. Well, not always small. I'm going to pull back on that, but think about your scale. and get those relationships and building. Those are small, no matter where you go in the thinking, is building that relationship. Ultimately, I'll just say one more thing for the chaplains, and Chaplain Shabazz mentioned this in terms of his talk was about preparation. You're going into another culture. You're going to a place where they have a form of Christianity, they have a form of Islam that doesn't necessarily look like the one that you practice. And so it's to be aware that there are different interpretations and directions that different populations go in that respect. And so it doesn't mean you have to get down to the books all the time. When you get to a country, go to the U.S. Embassy, talk to officials there, Foreign Service officers, local staff. They know the communities, they know the people to talk to, they know the people not to talk to. So the point is you're just thinking about how to build these relationships, how to talk to people and get in close and have a good project. Thanks.
Thank you, James. And I appreciate that on relationships and how key that is. And I think you're also getting at, in some ways, curiosity, but the thought process and how to ask the right questions and to discover context in different ways and in different places. I'll turn now to you, Peter, and then Knox in conclusion after that.
Thanks, Melissa. In the interest of time, I'll share just one best practice, and then pivot to some thoughts on kind of the unique added value that I think military chaplains have for this work. I know that you deal in terms of religious key leader engagements, but I wanted to talk for a moment about key religious leader engagements. In that I've noticed a habit that U.S. government personnel often have when trying to do this work of, I think, understandably and naturally gravitating towards religious leaders who hold formal official positions and titles within religious institutions, within structures of religious authority. And that's understandable, right? Those are the people that are most easily viewed as the kind of organic counterparts of U.S. government officials that they might be speaking with. The reality of how religion works in communities and societies, however, is of course the fact that the people who have the official titles are not necessarily the ones who matter the most in terms of shaping communities' understandings of religion and how it fits into their daily lives and how it relates to the kinds of issues that the U.S. government might want to engage with them on. As we all know, it's less common in many faith traditions that women hold formal positions of authority. And yet in so many religious communities, women are incredibly important informal brokers and generators of religious knowledge and shapers of the way that people think about how religion connects to their lives and issues of matters of public life. Likewise, younger religious leaders who may be somewhere in the authority structure, but who hesitate to kind of raise their voice when they're in the presence of their official, superiors, but yet actually have a much better sense of how, in particular, younger members of the community are thinking about faith and its relationship to the world around them. I think all of this means that you have to go out of your way to kind of get past the official gatekeepers of particular religious communities to kind of ensure that you're engaging the diversity of what's present in these communities in terms of religious experience. The military chaplain value proposition to me is a really fascinating thing, because the whole premise of strategic religious engagement, as it was kind of developed in spaces that I'm familiar with, State Department, USAID, it's underpinned by an assumption that religion or religious leaders, religious actors are out there, right? The US government is here and the religion is out there and we want to engage it. But of course, military chaplains are religious actors within the US government. Moreover, they have both a competency and a mandate for doing religion, talking religion, that other US government officials don't. For any number of reasons. I have, so many State Department colleagues, for example, who hesitate to go into religious spaces because they're not comfortable with the language, the framings, the way that issues are discussed, and just don't have the competency to engage in that way. Or they're worried that if they do, quote unquote, talk religion, that they will somehow be potentially they'll get in trouble legally because they're violating the Establishment Clause. And so, what this gets me to thinking about is, how powerful it might be for us to explore and build configurations of SRE that involve pairing military chaplains with US government personnel, that are based in other agencies, so that their respective kind of comparative advantages in these kinds of engagements can allow us to kind of maximize the levels of trust, comfort, reciprocity, and yet also substantive expertise that's needed to achieve the kind of outcomes that we're looking for.
Thank you, Peter, and I appreciate you raising that particularly unique role of military chaplains as religious actors themselves within government. Knox, over to you to wrap us up. Thanks.
Just to build off what Peter said, this isn't a phrase that I came up with, but I think it really sums up the way that we need to be thinking about these issues, is that faith isn't a box that we check, because faith is in every box. So this idea of like, we're here and religious actors are there. Well, we know belief in formal religion or even a non-belief is a belief system that can direct how people behave. And so we need to understand it's not something we just check a box and we're done. It's permeating everything. And so that's going to influence how the partners, our adversaries, see the world and interpret what we're doing. We need to understand that. A couple of thoughts just to wrap up, so we'll stay on time. Others have said this, but I think this work and the work of chaplains is so important because it really does advance and reflect American values and interests at the same time. The people of the Indo-Pacific region, the billions of people, they know the United States stands for human dignity. They know that we stand for human rights and religious freedom. They know that we stand for self-governance. And that's why I think the people are open to us. They welcome us. Now, the challenge is it's not always true for their governments. If you think of drawing a line straight from South Korea down through Taiwan, Philippines, and kind of around Malaysia and Indonesia, you have sort of an east-west divide on how governments are treating religion, the free practice of religion. The eastern portion, Oceania, very permissible environment for your work. The western half from China, India, those countries, a lot of challenges. They're going to be very skeptical of these American values of religious freedom and democracy and pluralism. Even though there are some democracies there, they're all borderline or liberal or becoming more illiberal. So how you navigate that is going to be a challenge, but I think this is our competitive advantage. And in fact, it's an asymmetrical advantage against our competitor in the region, China, because they're against all of this stuff. One quote I want to leave you with is from a retired Army chaplain, Mike Hoyt. He was the command chaplain in Iraq during the surge in 2007. And he talks about the warning of instrumentalizing faith in this work. And he did some cutting edge stuff to engage Sunni and Shia leaders to try to bring peace. And in an article he wrote several years ago, he said, trivializing religion as a subset of any other operating system guarantees irreligious results. Religious dialogue, achievements, or counsels cannot become staff gimmicks to leverage advantages. To do so makes the results irreverent and therefore irrelevant. I mean, first of all, that's got a preacher's kind of cadence to it at the end, but I think he's right to point out that, you're going to be walking a fine line because you're going to want to sincerely engage these other people of faith, that maybe they share the same faith. Maybe they're people who share just a devotion to spirituality and devoting their lives to serving their community. And you want to understand that. At the same time, they need to understand you're representing the United States, and we have priorities, and we have policies, and we have an agenda. I think most will appreciate that, but this is a line that you have to walk. And so, a couple of thoughts to end. I hope we can see more commanders joining these discussions. I've been a part of these for a few times now. I was at USERPAC last year, and I feel like we're preaching to the choir. Like, we think you guys are great. You guys are doing this mission well, but to really have commanders appreciate what you can do and also your limitations. I'd love to find a way to get them into the room, either virtual or physically. Second thought is, I think the chaplaincy corps across service branches needs to create a longer career path so that the expertise like Zach has developed doesn't get totally lost. That they can, because I've seen time and time again, chaplains go do some cool stuff, and then they're sent back to sort of the core mission, and that's the tension in this work. But how do you create a career path or a way to capture the lessons learned? And then lastly, I really want to see you guys in this role serve as ambassadors and not analysts. Yes, you need to understand the dynamics. Yes, you should read the religious freedom reports and the Pew Research Center stuff. But I think what you bring is your faith actors in uniform representing the United States, and that's unique, and that's powerful, and that's special. And there are other people who have been trained to be analysts to look at the nitty gritty. You'll understand that. But your value proposition, as to use that phrase that Peter used, is as an ambassador, to be that face, that friendly face of the United States that represents who we are as a people. And so anyway, I'm a big fan. I'm happy to be a part of this. And many thanks to Zach and Martine and Melissa for helping pull this all together.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all four of you for sharing from your wealth of experiences and perspectives, and your respective engagements too with chaplains over the years. And I won't try to reiterate everything that's been covered, but just thank you all. And I know that so much of what you've been sharing resonates with this audience. And to those of you who are tuning in across time zones, thank you for being here with us. This gives me hope. We have 40 folks in the room, and that says a lot in terms of your own engagement and curiosity about this work. So thank you for the work that you do. With that, I know we're at time. I'll turn to Zach. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa, and all of our panelists. Especially considering how late it is. Melissa, we've slowly seen the sun set through your window, so I recognize that it's past your bedtime, so thanks for spending some time with us. We are a little over time, but I do want to address a couple of questions that are in the chat box. One of them is from Chaplain Kevin Moody. Let me scroll up. How should chaplains navigate moments in an engagement when a partner raises challenging tensions with the U.S. over political or religious issues in the media cycle? So kind of a public affairs question. One of the panelists want to take that one?
Yeah, Matt. Hey, Matt, Zach, let me catch that. It's Chaplain Shabazz, USPAC chaplain.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Mooney. So I've been to a couple of places. Let me just go to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. When I served that, I was the kind of special advisor for the commanding general. So I had the responsibility of going down and talking to those guys who were detained. Well, as you would probably imagine, me going in there in uniform caused a lot of consternation with those guys, even though I was of the Islamic faith. So they not only threw feces and piss on me, they had really kind of adversarial attitude towards me because I was in the uniform. So over a period of time, just gaining their trust and kind of listening to their concerns, and also separating what we do as chaplains as juxtaposed to what the media outlets and whatever the administration was doing during that time, and separating what the American people actually believe. We were able to make some inroads and then provide what we need as far as religious support. And that's really understanding your role. I love what Thames said about being ambassadors. So a lot of times, if you're an ambassador, you're kind of putting your feelings to the back burner to get to the end state to find out how we can have some commonality and kind of broker our shared beliefs. So I would say, if people start engaging in that way over political and religious issues, take your ego out of it, right? And find a way to get to those common values. And Dr. Johnston said something earlier, and I'll end with this, but it's the verse in the Quran that he quoted. It says, "We have made you into many tribes and families, not that you hate each other, but you get to know each other." That verse, Lata'arafu in Arabic, means that you know actually the essence of that person, right? Who that person is, where they come from, and how they operate. When I went to study Arabic in Jordan, they wouldn't even let me register for 5 days because they wanted to sit down and drink tea. They wanted to know my mother, my father, everything about me. And I was extremely agitated because I wanted to register on Monday, right? But I didn't get to register until Friday after prayer because they wanted to know everything about me. And I had to sit there and play like I wasn't agitated, right? So anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for that, sir. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Melissa, I did want to give you 10 seconds to talk about products and resources that might be available for chaplains to use in our engagements.
Thank you so much, and I'll keep it brief. I believe Peter already put a link to some of those that are available through the Berkeley Center website. There are so many resources that are out there. Many of those are being put in a digital repository that the SRE Hub at the Berkeley Center has been culling and combining. We're planning to get a new tranche of materials up that include specifically training tools and materials, some of which I speak from my own experience have been used to engage with, and we've adapted them to support military chaplains. And I know Chaplain Zumwalt, you're very well aware of some of those, including the USIP Action Guide series that Martine was one of the co-editors of that series, and that's one tool among many. James mentioned some of the work that he and Peter when at USAID were doing to lead on some of the SRE trainings as well. So there are a lot of resources. Take a look at that link, and I would also personally be happy to follow up with anyone who has questions or is interested in something specific. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And again, the rest of the panel, fantastic stuff, and we appreciate your time. Okay, so now we're going to move to our third and final panel discussion. This one is titled The Future of American SRE. The goal of this discussion is to consider and maybe inspire, kind of like what Martine mentioned a couple of times, what are the next possible steps in military chaplain strategic religious engagement. To do that, I'm going to introduce this panel's moderator, Eric Patterson, and then turn it over to him to lead our discussion. As a reminder, we're going to have the chat box open. Feel free to put in your questions. We'll have some time at the end. Remember to include your name, your affiliation, and we'll get to that. Okay, so without further ado, Eric Patterson is the former Associate Director of Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for the Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and continues to serve there as a research fellow. He serves as President and CEO of the Victims of Communism Foundation and Museum in Washington, D.C., and is the past President of Religious Freedom Institute. He's worked at the U.S. Department of State, and as a uniformed service member with the Air National Guard as a commander for over 20 years. He's the author or editor of 24 books on the intersection of religion, ethics, and national security affairs. So Eric, over to you and your panel.
My name's Eric Patterson. I had the pleasure of joining the Berkeley Center right at the beginning. Some time ago, we've got 3 great panelists on the topic of the future of strategic religious engagement. Let me just say from a historical perspective that with the founding of the Berkeley Center, we began engagement with chaplains and with PME institutions in the fall of 2008. We ran for the first time a 3-day seminar with the Institute for National Security, Ethics, and Leadership, a 3-day seminar for faculty from 18 different PME institutions and chaplains at the National War College in June of 2009. And then over the next period of years, a set of resources were prepared, a set of videos and study guides for the classroom, a set of case studies on religion, peace, and conflict, and individual briefings for SOCOM, for U.S. Southern Command, et cetera, as well as a set of 1 to 3 day seminars for the Army Chaplain School, the Navy Chaplain School, the Navy Postgraduate School, the Navy War College, and things. That was going with a lot of energy until sequestration, for those who remember how 2014, 2015 happened, and then slowed down. But that work has continued in part at Georgetown and in part with an offshoot of Georgetown's Berkeley Center, which is the Religious Freedom Institute. Many of you know that the Army Chief of Chaplains has placed a reserve chaplain, Graham Glover, there, who's another resource for all of you. But for tonight, we're going to hear from really 3 very seasoned leaders with a lot of experience in Europe and Africa at the joint staff level, and of course, they're in Indo-PACOM. So we'll be hearing in just a moment from Chaplain Zumwalt, if you're going to make some introductory comments, and then we'll hear from Chaplain Wayne McCrae, former Joint Command Staff and now affiliated with Berkeley Center. We will hear from Chaplain Chip Satterley, who spent some time at the State Department and is now there in the Pacific, and then Chaplain Karen Meeker, whose most recent assignment prior to 2026 was as the AFRICOM Command Chaplain, and now she's here at the Pentagon. We're looking forward to hearing from each of them and then moving to a time of Q&A and discussion. So let me turn it over without further ado to Chaplain Zumwalt.
Yeah, thank you for that, Eric. And again, what an honor to be here with all of you today. The benefit that I wasn't anticipating when creating the schedule of going last is that 2/3 of my notes have already been touched on by everybody else, which truly is great because that means we're already kind of in sync. Everyone's already thinking the same thing, and it means you have to listen to me even less. So really only a handful of things I want to touch on, and that's only because they're not necessarily my most favorite points, but because they're points that I don't think I've heard yet in this conversation that I want to kind of submit to the record. We've already touched a little bit on increasing the training of our chaplains to do this work. I think that is very typically the first challenge that we receive from outsiders and even from internally, I would say. There is a legitimate concern about taking a first tour chaplain straight out of basic school, and now he finds himself doing, diplomatic work with a faith community leader in a foreign country, and that is a legitimate concern, and so I think we do need to increase the rigor of the training to include creating new training in our basic, intermediate, advanced leadership courses. I'm a little bit jealous of the Army for a while. I don't know if the Army Chaplain School is still doing this, but they were having James Alexander and other folks from state come down to teach a course on some of that religious engagement. I think that's a model that our other service branch schools could look into. I also think incorporating expertise from organizations represented here and inviting them either virtually or to actually come to our schoolhouses to give a lecture, give a day, spend a week specifically on this kind of advisement work. The next thing I would say is don't forget all the amazing resources that are available through State Department. As probably most of you know, there is an FSO Academy. There's a FAO training pipeline. I wouldn't expect our chaplains to go through that entire thing, but there are probably a couple of classes that maybe it's worth trying to get Department of War chaplains into, especially ones that we've kind of identified to be going out into jobs around the world that might be doing some of this religious engagement. The other thing I'll say, and I believe somebody touched on it, it might have in fact been Dr. Johnston when he mentioned subspecialties. So in the Navy, we do have a religion and culture AQD 1430, which happens to be what I am. And the billet that I'm filling right now is coded as religion and culture 1430. I think that's something that needs to be more effectively leveraged. Whenever people bring up or compliment the stuff that I have done here in the last 3 years, I want to emphasize I'm not a remarkable person. Whatever remarkable things I've done is because I've been given a remarkable opportunity. I think I am an example of what right looks like when we educate somebody and then put him or her in a billet with the intention to do this kind of work. And I think that's something that we need to increase. The Navy is creating a religion and culture chaplain every single year. I imagine the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, Coast Guard have something similar. So really leveraging something that already exists, that subspecialty work, I think is a good first step. Another frequent kind of challenge, and again, equally legitimate to the training piece, is about demand signal. Are we swimming outside of our lane, which I don't think we are, because we have, at least on the Navy side, one of our 4 core capabilities is this advisement and religious liaison. It's 25% of our work. But are we swimming in State Department's lane? And are we doing so against their wishes or without their interest? I think it's been stated multiple times by panelists here. There is a growing recognition among our diplomatic partners that this is a capacity that they have lost. Unfortunately, in an ironic kind of way, I think military chaplains are kind of the last man standing when it comes to strategic religious engagement. And so we, myself personally, but I'm also aware of some of the other folks, particularly here in this room, are helping State Department create that demand signal through cables, through info memos that are bouncing around within State Department, to be leveraged by Department of War chaplaincy to respond to. And I think that's something that we can continue to do as we develop relationships with state, either in Foggy Bottom or out in the embassies in the countries, helping through our work with them, showing them what we bring to the table and how it contributes to their efforts, and then helping them design that signal to Department of War so that we can continue to doing that work. I think that opens up a lot of opportunities. Another thing that I haven't quite heard mentioned yet was the Great Power Competition. I won't talk on that too much. I think I saw somebody post my article in the chat. Thank you to whoever that was. I think what we have been able to do in the last couple of decades, centuries, is have an assumption that we are always going to have positive relationships with the local faith communities in the Indo-Pacific. I don't know if we can continue to rely on that assumption. Our competitors in the region are publicly and aggressively working towards developing ties with local faith communities in an effort to have some malign influence. And so if we're looking for another demand signal or another reason that we probably need to engage in this even more than we usually do, and even more for the reasons that have already been articulated here, that might be another one, is the religious domain of the Indo-Pacific is now a competitive arena. And then another thing I'll mention, because I'm a chaplain, we say spiritual readiness is our North Star. I really try, when I'm having internal conversations with my Navy chaplain brethren, to park this work in spiritual readiness, which again is our kind of main focus right now. Not only do we have service members scattered across the PICs, across Southeast Asia, all over the Indo-Pacific. They're either rotational forces, our CBs, our oceanic engagement teams, or deployed forces during missions and exercises, or permanent parties, our Marine Security Guard detachments at embassies, of course, our defense attaches. We have service members in all those locations that could use spiritual provision, that is not afforded to them because they are in distributed operations with not a chaplain around. But also, I would say, for the historians here in the room, if you look at what happened in World War II, a lot of the places that we were operating, and even if we didn't have an actual presence there, McCarthy's island hopping campaign, whenever American pilots were shot down, whenever service members washed ashore because their ship was beached, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of stories of local indigenous faith communities providing not only for their spiritual readiness, but medical care and protecting them from the enemy in those occupied territories. And so I think part of preparing the battle space, and I don't like that phrase because I don't want to instrumentalize our work, but I think part of recognizing preparing the spiritual readiness of our service members now, but also in preparation, if God forbid we move from deterrence to kinetic work, it's going to be important that we continue to have those trusting relationships with our local faith communities. I've got a couple more things, but I'll stop there. I'm over time. I apologize for that, Eric. But again, thanks for the opportunity to have a conversation with you.
Chaplain Zumwalt, thank you very much for that, and lots of meat there for us to dissect, perhaps just a little bit later. But now let's turn to our next speaker, Chaplain McRae.
Well, thank you, Eric. And Zach, thank you so much for a lot of this. I know others work together to put this all on, but I know you're a big part of this. Just grateful for the efforts that you're doing out there. There are a few points I would like to make, and I don't want to belabor some of them because they have been touched on in certain places. But I think there's a reality here that we kind of need to look at. My time in the service, I'm 2 years now into retirement. It feels like a lifetime has gone by. And when I look or hear what's going on in PACOM, I can easily think that, my gosh, a lot of time has gone by, because when I was at the Joint Staff, getting involved in some of this work was free. This dynamic and synergy was certainly not as evident. If it was taking place, certainly not to the degree that it is now. And I think the point I want to make with that is pairing that with the conversation we just had in the previous panel regarding the things that have been lost in government. Anytime we deal with large bureaucracy, government, different administrations, different focus. And we see this whenever there's a new admiral or general who comes in, there's a new direction. Some of the time they are just minor course corrections, some of the time they are major. A highlight of that, though, is that when it comes to SRE in the military, even with the good things that we're seeing currently in PACOM, we have to be mindful that, in my opinion, so much of what is happening is still a matter of the right people in the right place at the right time, which is not always a guaranteed thing. We need to continue to work toward institutionalizing the capability of strategic religious engagement within the military, and not keep it parochial within just certain services, but to truly make it a joint endeavor that we see going on. And the challenges to that are going to be the challenges that we've always had. Number one is having billets. Typically, there are more demands for chaplains and their support staff for what should be done than there are personnel to get those things done, and to expect that there will be people who can devote significant portions of their time to the work of strategic religious engagement when there are other demand signals that legitimately are the first priority for chaplains. We need to make certain we continue to make sound cases for having the numbers of people that we need. Knox made the point in his closing. It would be wonderful to see commanders being a part of this. And that truly is the central point of making certain that what we do is institutionalized. The commanders have to be the ones who are vocalizing an interest in what we're doing. They have to recognize the relevance, and part of the way that they see the relevance is when we learn to use the institutional methods, such as from the joint perspective, looking at training exercises, developing injects that say to the commander, part of preparing for your mission is to have strategic religious engagement and analysis taking place. And any of you who have served in those senior levels know that when it comes time to try to get an inject, when it comes time to try to get billets, when it comes time to try to get money, we are competing with everyone else who is on the military team who have efforts that they want done. So there truly has to be a focus that speaks in the commander's language to try to get us into where they need to be. And we have to recognize the partners that we have. We've talked about some regular partners so far tonight in this webinar, but I'd like to suggest also that we need to be drawing upon the staff within our various commands, those who develop plans, the 5-shop, the trainers, the 7, the foreign area officers, in addition to embassy and consulate personnel, because together, when all of these people are talking about the need for strategic religious engagement, we truly strengthen our ability to go forward in that area. Let's see. I do think it's valid. As I look at the change, the conversation, the people having the conversation, and all the different components and PACOM talking about the efforts that they're doing, I think it's very valid to understand and to see and to speak in the idea that strategic religious engagement has and will continue to become more central to strategic competition and partner engagement. And certainly we want to talk about those things because SRI gives legitimacy, SRI develops influence, and it develops access. And I think it's very clear that certainly in the Indo-Pacific, in AFRICOM, as Chaplain Meeker, I'm certain will be able to attest to, and even in many parts of Europe, there have been great strides in building these networks that work together on areas of SRI. But I would like to throw out just 3 perhaps challenges. I'd like to remind everyone in the room that first, when we talk about chaplains and wanting to use them or involve them in doing the work of strategic religious engagement, that all chaplains, first of all, before the military gets their hands on them, all chaplains are owned by their religious organization. And the person who speaks to the department on behalf of religious organizations are endorsers. I am an endorser for my faith group. And so I would just share a little anecdote about what is maybe a month ago that Secretary Hegseth put out his warning or notice that chaplains would no longer wear their rank on their uniform. And the conversation among the endorsers was passionate. It covered both sides of the spectrum. And there's, variety of opinion. So I would simply caution that it would not be reasonable to assume that every chaplain would have the full backing and support of their endorsers to be involved in this work unless this work is well explained. And I don't know that there's ever really been a case made to endorsers on what strategic religious engagement is or what it is not. And that doing this still remains grounded in our authentic religious leadership. And part of where this happens, and again, Chaplain Meeker in her current position, those from the military who can speak to endorsers are what's called the Armed Forces Chaplains Board, which is the collective body of the Chief of Chaplains. So I would encourage a certain person on this panel perhaps to raise the question, to the chiefs of chaplains? Do they want to begin circulating this idea that this is a role that chaplains should be playing and how they get there? Second caution, the military will only get what it trains for. And I understand, again, in the PACOM area, we're having great success at this moment with people going out and doing strategic religious engagement. But it needs to be deeply embedded in the training processes for the joint force, for it to truly, I think, get beyond the points of fits and starts when it comes to how we do SRE. And then thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, just remember always that requirements drive dollars, requirements drive billets, and requirements drive time for training. So if SRE is not required, it will not be resourced, it will not be prioritized, and it will not endure. So the real question is, who is demanding strategic religious engagement? As long as it remains mostly chaplains talking to chaplains, we're still not getting the full traction that we need where it should be. The combatant commands should be the ones talking about it. The services should be talking about it in terms of providing the training to do it well. And we'll know we're there when we see it reflected in campaign plans and in the operational requirements. So, thank you.
Chaplain McCray, Wayne, it's great to see you, and thank you for those remarks. And it made me reflect on a lot of things, but one is the title of this panel is about the future of American. That's in the title, SRE, the future of American SRE. And this really is a distinctive of the U.S. Chaplain Corps. It's quite different. So few other military chaplaincies would ever even think along these lines for a variety of reasons that we all know. I will note there is a new merging of the way that chaplains are trained in the ethics school in Europe right now, in Germany and Hamburg, and there may be some partners there in a unique situation that's just started this year. Well, with that, I know there's much that probably people want to ask, particularly about this embedding it over a period of time so that we're not starting over and over and over again as it sometimes feels. But let's move on to Chip. Let me turn it over right now to Chaplain Satterley.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Aloha from Oahu, Hawaii. It's an honor to join this panel and share some thoughts on the future of SRE in our military context. We are living in a time of rapid change, geopolitically, technologically, and culturally. In the Indo-Pacific and beyond, the religious landscape is as dynamic as a security environment. Faith communities remain central to the identity, resilience, and decision-making of many nations and peoples. As military chaplains, we are uniquely positioned to understand, engage, and build bridges across these religious and cultural divides. SRE is not just a nice to have, it's a mission enabler, full stop. SRE helps us to build trust and rapport with partner nations and local communities, to gain critical cultural and situational awareness, to prevent and mitigate conflict by understanding religious drivers and influencers, to support humanitarian and disaster response by leveraging faith-based networks and organizations, and to enhance the legitimacy and effectiveness of our operations. In short, SRE is a force multiplier. It aligns our values, our strategy, and our commitment to people. As we look to the future, I see several key trends shaping the evolution of SRE. 1, integration with whole of government and whole of society approaches. SRE will increasingly be integrated with diplomatic, informational, and developmental efforts. Chaplains will serve as connectors, linking military, governmental, and non-governmental actors, including faith-based organizations. 2, leveraging technology and information. Digital platforms and social media are transforming how religious ideas spread and how communities organize. We must develop digital literacy and use technology to map religious networks, monitor trends, and engage responsibly online. 3, professionalism and training. The future of SRI requires chaplains who are not only theologically grounded, but also trained in cross-cultural communication, religious analysis, and strategic engagement. We should continue to advocate for advanced education, language training, and regional expertise for our chaplain corps. In the U.S. Army, for example, at our chaplain schoolhouse, chaplains at various echelons, our basic course, our career course, and our field grade officer course, receive blocks of instruction on SRI. These are chaplains and chaplain candidates from the rank of second lieutenant all the way to lieutenant colonel. 4, partnering with indigenous religious leaders. Local faith leaders are often the most trusted voices in their communities. Our role is to listen, learn, and empower, supporting local solutions and respecting religious autonomy. 5, resilience and moral leadership. In an era of uncertainty, chaplains provide moral clarity and resilience, both within our formations and in our engagements abroad. SRI is not just about external relationships, though that's part of it. It's also about strengthening the ethical foundation of our own force. Of course, there are challenges ahead that include navigating religious pluralism and sensitivities, avoiding perceptions of proselytizing, ensuring operational security while also building trust, and balancing our dual roles as religious leaders and staff officers. These challenges will require humility, wisdom, and commitment to ethical engagement. Based on my experiences, I offer a few best practices for the future of SRI. 1, deliberate planning. Integrate SRI into operational planning from the outset, not just as an afterthought. 2, assessment and metrics. Develop ways to measure the impact of SRI on mission outcomes. 3, collaboration. Continue to work closely with civil affairs, public affairs, and other government agencies and non-government agencies and organizations to create a holistic engagement strategy. And 4, continuous learning. Fostering a culture of after-action reviews and lessons learned in SRI activities that are shared all across the military and our government and non-government partners. In closing, I believe the future of SRI is bright, but it will require an intentional investment of time, talent, and trust. As chaplains, we are called to be builders, peacemakers, and trusted advisors. Our work in SRI is not just about religious affairs, it's about advancing peace, stability, and human dignity in our complex world. May we continue to innovate, collaborate, and lead with integrity as we shape the future of SRI together. Mahalo. I look forward to our continued discussion and collaboration.
Chaplain Satterley, thank you very, very much for those remarks and for all that you've done behind the scenes to provide some of the background content for going into this today. Well, I'm very pleased about our last speaker. And I think a question in my own mind when I think about the kind of career that she has had comes from a recent experience I had at Leavenworth with the chaplains in the ethics program. And that was a conversation that they had about a commitment among that community that when you're an ethicist at one part of your career as a chaplain, that you not stop, you never leave the community, even if you take on more staff or pastoral functions at other parts of your career. And it does seem that some chaplains never really leave the strategic religious engagement community despite the types of roles that they're in. And certainly someone who's had a lot of very, very diverse experiences during her career is Chaplain Meeker. So ma'am, over to you.
Well, thank you, Eric, for that warm welcome. Look forward to meeting with you here in Washington, D.C. I hope we get that chance here soon. And thanks, Chaplain Zach. Brilliant panel and discussion this evening today. And thank you for letting me be a part of that. I do want to recognize that, there's been a lot of changes in the last 16, 17 months, and I know many on this call tonight have been directly impacted by that. So a lot of changes, and I think Martine talked about opportunity, and I think there's always that opportunity as we go through tremendous seasons of change, and so I take heart in the scripture from Jeremiah that says, "Pray for the place to which you have been sent, for in its well-being you will find yours." And I know that's a passion and a prayer for many colleagues doing this work, and doing strategic religious leader engagement is often the highlights of a chaplain's career, is to be able to reach out to a colleague in different parts of the world to try to find that common ground that we can work together for peace and stability. Our military and our U.S. government is often sent to places that is in great need of help and aid. And so what an honor it is when we can do a strategic religious leader engagement with that hope and that prayer that we can work together, and in helping others, we find our well-being as well. And I think that could be a great remedy for our country as well. And so on that, I think looking toward the future, really going off of a lot of what Wayne shared about the endorsers, I think that's a place of opportunity going into the future, is to where can we work together with our faith groups across the United States, and our endorsers, over 140 endorsers of our chaplains in the military, are all connected to many missionary groups and charity groups that work globally. And I think that's an area where we could really optimize for good around the world, and again bring good to our country. Sometimes it's good to look up above your own circumstances and look around the world and see much greater needs where our wealth and our treasure can be used in ways that can really benefit our world. So I think we have used that important entity of our endorsers. Just last December, it was the result of 2 years of coordination, having Archbishop Rolio of the Archdiocese of Military Services on his Advent and Christmas rounds into Africa and the Middle East, into Djibouti. And this December, he met with our U.S. Ambassador, Ambassador Kirst, who hosted an engagement at her residence with the Minister of Islamic Affairs of Djibouti, the Archbishop, the Bishop of Djibouti, some of the other imams, the commanding general of the CJTF Horn of Africa task force, and the chaplains there in Djibouti. So really a high-level engagement, bringing together key religious leaders, not just for Djibouti, but the Minister of Islamic Affairs for Djibouti is connected regionally. The Archbishop was the president of the U.S. Bishops Conference, which made him the senior ranking Catholic of the United States. So these were very well-connected leaders that not just bilaterally, but also regionally and globally. And I think if we can look strategically across our world, we could do more of those kinds of engagements. I know you talked, James, about making sure that we don't miss the local piece, but I think well-developed engagements also can work locally as well, as as that delegation also went to Bishop Dibey's church and charity. So it had ground level elements as well, not just at the ambassador's residence for a nice dinner, but also like engagements in Zambia where we had 9 chaplains of the U.S. Army, Air Force, and Navy. And we were able to also do services on the weekends with the local Zambian congregations and the Zambian chaplains. And that allowed that broader context, both for our chaplains to experience the culture of Zambia and get to meet some of the people, but also for the Zambians to meet Americans in real time and space and worship together, which is so powerful. We also, interesting, you mentioned, Wayne, about working with endorsers and getting their buy-in about utilizing their chaplains in religious leader engagements. We had 2 White House level situations last summer in West Africa, and we had a manifest, if you will, of chaplains with significant ties to different countries in West Africa in the different services. And so we were able to utilize one of our chaplains from the Air Force here on the East Coast, Dover Air Base, that was from northern Nigeria, and he was very helpful in giving cultural context in the Middle Belt and northern Nigeria, as well as into Niger. And then our contacts with our chaplain generals and other chaplains in Ghana and Burkina Faso, Niger were and continue to be extremely helpful with the rescue of an American missionary, as well as the slaughtering of Christians in Nigeria by the Islamic State and Boko Haram. And it was interesting that chaplain in particular that we used, a Roman Catholic priest, did not want his endorser to know that he might be going on a very dangerous mission. So it is something we need to talk with our endorsers about, because some of these missions can be very risky and very dangerous for our chaplains who might be out there on the cutting edge of things like that. I think another thing in the future I would love to see if we could leverage is some of those religious leaders, again, that have very special gifts, like a Father Haddad in Jordan or a Reverend Dr. Billy Kim in South Korea, that just have incredible influence, incredible leadership, as well as deep American and U.S. cultural understanding. So they're able to be that Emma Skye, if you will, or Gertrude Bell, that those very special people in those seasons that are able to build those bridges with the United States and other cultures that we're involved with around the world. And again, I think the religious leaders like a Reverend Dr. Billy Kim and Father Haddad in the Middle East and Asia can be incredibly powerful, not only in the Middle East, but in Asia, but America and Europe as well. And on some of those influential religious leaders, we met with the Patriarch of Alexandria about this time last year in Cairo, of course, in conjunction with the embassy and the ambassador Herrero Mustafa, that was very supportive of that engagement, which was coordinated with the Chief of Chaplains of Greece. So we were connecting all those really strong relationships that we have in Europe to Africa and broader. And of course, why were we meeting with the Patriarch of Alexandria? Because of Russia's incursion into Ukraine, and the Ukrainian church asking to leave the Russian Orthodox Church, which was blessed off by the Patriarch of Constantinople. then caused the Russian Orthodox Church to begin to work in Africa and turn poor African ancient congregations away from Alexandria and toward Moscow. So these can have tremendous implications across wide swaths of the continent of Africa and other places. And again, I think those are, if we start to think, and I think for those of us as chaplains and as religious leaders, we don't think in the perhaps the government lines that are set. I think our viewpoint may be more globally in that sense, where, for example, when we met with the Patriarch of Alexandria, that was in Egypt, but that's not a part of United States Africa Command. It's part of United States Central Command. But Egypt definitely thinks of itself as being part of Africa. So it's those kinds of, I think, arbitrary lines that sometimes get in the way of some of the work that we do. And I think, moving forward, it would be good if we can, for chaplains to kind of bring that perspective that these lines a lot of times aren't very helpful. They may be for logistics and planning military operations, but as we think culturally and with religious import, I think that's really important. And I'll just mention two other things very briefly. I know we're running out of time, but we've been working with the National Geospatial Agency, the mapping people, to do a global mapping of religious trends across time. And we've seen that very helpful in Africa and Nigeria, especially, where we did a deep dive, again, about a year ago. And also I'll mention, I think things like what Indonesia has proposed, and there's some people here in the United States that are proposing that there be an R20 in conjunction with the G20 in December, and that military chaplains, U.S. chaplains, would be a part of that. So the R20 would be global religious leaders gathering in December prior to global economic leaders meeting, which is being hosted by the United States this year. So again, I think that's like another area where hopefully in the future we might take the opportunity there to, again, build relationships and have that connective tissue where I think military chaplains can be diplomats and camouflage, as well as shepherds of spiritual strength. So thanks for letting me be a part tonight.
Chaplain Meeker, thank you so much for those remarks. And, that last comment, our colleague, Catherine Marshall at the Berkeley Center for many years, former World Bank diplomat, leader of the World Faith Development Council, has been involved with an F20. There's been an F20, a Faith 20, for more than a decade on the margins of the G20. And there's a new initiative over the past 18 months, as you said, an R20, a different group, pushing a religion 20 kind of parallel to that. I won't get into all of that here, but it is a recognition that the faith communities are trying to bring to the attention of world leaders the tremendous religiosity of the world that we live in, its multidimensionality, all the things that Doug Johnston up to today have been talking about for the past 30 years. Now, we did have one question in the chat that I wanted to give to the panel, and that is this question from Brian Bort about the difficulty of translating religious language. It can be a bottleneck. Religious translation is a difficult thing to find. What can be done to help and establish deeper cultural and linguistic translation that stays? Obviously, the case here he talked about was some interfaith chaplains in Japan. Does anyone want to jump on this specific issue? And Brian, do you have any clarification on that? It seems like it could go two or three different ways. Any of our panelists?
So this is Brian Bort. Apologies for jumping in here, but we discovered that Tohoku University was actually going to graduate its first class of interfaith chaplains. We're pretty sure that they are under the medical school. And so there was just a lot we didn't know. They reached out to us, specifically to the Air Force chaplains here on Misawa, and we just had the most wonderful exchange. It ended up being on NHK, and there was some local newspaper coverage as well. And but what we're finding is that ongoing interaction is just very difficult, because all the translators that we have access to are very open and upfront, be like, and essentially say, I don't have the training to translate these concepts. They don't, so that we're missing a lot of the detail and the resolution. Anyway, so that was a recognition that, like, we're able to sit together, we were able to be together and share some, but there was a lot that we couldn't discuss, and maybe there's a strength to that as well. But also wanted to plug, if we knew about the Tohoku University chaplain program that they were developing. They said that it came out of the Fukushima Daiichi event. They watched US chaplains perform so well, and they said, well, that's something that maybe we need to look at. And so that's what they told us when they came on base. Thank you so much.
Brian, thanks for that. And yeah, words like carburetor that went from English into all languages, we don't necessarily have them theologically speaking, right? So yeah, this seems like a challenge for translators who may not have that theological background. But let's turn over to the panel. Anyone comments on this?
Yeah, Eric, I'll jump in just real quick. A lot of the travel that I do, I encounter the same thing. I think this is an opportunity for us to give a demand signal, or maybe even our role as in an advisement capacity to the local embassies. The work that I do, we contract translators, and that's usually through the embassy because they already know local translators available. And so if we can, again, communicate to the embassy, hey, we need somebody that has an expertise in religious translation services, they can source that, or that puts a bug in their ear that they need to start developing relationships with local faith communities that can provide those translation services. So it does end up becoming a little bit of a forcing function by reaching out to the local country teams and having them try to help source specific religious translators.
Thanks for that. And of course, in the US, we're just not good with second and third languages because we don't start that very young. But something that some of the authors and some of the speakers we've had tonight, especially Doug Johnston, have talked about for the last 30 years is one of the great repositories in the United States for some of this is from our highly religious recent immigrant communities who have the language and the culture. Those are the kind of people to recruit, if we can, into the intelligence community, to the State Department, to our humanitarian agencies, and of course, into the military. But these are very, particularly if we're getting into theological discussions, religious discussions, the terminology actually can be quite daunting. Let me just ask Chaplain Meeker, Chaplain McRae, any last comments before I turn them, or Chaplain Satterley, before we turn the mic back over to Chaplain Zumwalt?
I think there's a lot of opportunity out there, and I think this discussion will help us to find that opportunity. Thanks, Eric.
Well, let me say then, before I turn it back to our our sponsor for the evening, for many, many years, I was your customer, whether I was traveling for the State Department or my time as an Air National Guard commander. I think close to 20 chapels in a dozen countries, 8 or 9 countries overseas, plus lots of chapel time here in the United States. So to all of you for what you do for our men and women in uniform and their families, thank you very much. And thank you for what you do to represent our country. Let me turn it over to our hosts to bring us to a closing for the evening.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. And thank you to our distinguished panelists. Such a rich conversation. So I appreciate it. And again, Eric, for your leadership of this panel. I'm grateful for it. Okay, with that, we have come to the end of our webinar. My deepest gratitude to the Navy Chaplain Corps' Religion and Culture Community of Interest, the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy, and the Everett Center for Global Religious Freedom at Dallas Baptist University. My most profound thanks to all the speakers, literally all around the world and in different time zones and different days who participated in this webinar. Obviously, without your time and your willingness to contribute, this event would not have taken place. Finally, thanks very much to our audience, serving all over the globe, some in uniform, some not, who committed 3 hours of their lives to attending this training. I hope it was not only educational, but also inspirational in taking or continuing the conversation and taking next steps. I'm excited to see what God has in store for us in this critical strategic religious engagement work. Now, as I said at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded, and so we're going to post it online for others to be able to view later. Stand by for a follow-on email that'll describe where it is hung and how you can access it. So with that, I bid you a good evening, good afternoon, or good morning.